Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this podcast is perfect for you. Hello friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. Today, James and I are going to be jumping into all things film related with the latest release of our YouTube series, Fallow Frenzy, which you guys would have seen kick off last Wednesday, the 12th of Feb, with part 1. By now, you would have seen both that and the trailer, so you sort of know what to expect and the tone of that film, which we're very keen to be releasing. We've got a highly anticipated 5-part YouTube series dropping over the coming weeks every Wednesday from 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, so there's plenty of action there. In this film, James and I jump behind the camera and we actually follow close friend Nick Morton in the hills of New South Wales, Australia, in search for a mature fallow deer buck. So right in tune with this time of year. We've got this film series dropping just before the rut to hopefully get you guys nice and keen. And then today we're going to just do a deep dive into all that and do a bit of a behind the scenes breakdown of this film series. We hope you enjoy.
Whether you're hiking a distant trail or following up an animal into a scree cliff, you want to be confident in the boots that you wear. And for Ayden and I, that means Lower. We've been running the Lower Ranger GTX3s for over 5 years now without even having a blister. We've teamed up with the Lower team to extend their generosity to you to get you a unique 10% off code by using the code TWINELEMENTS10 at checkout for your next order and so you can try them yourselves. So the background to this hunt, Fallow Frenzy, actually took place 12 months prior, where for most of the rut I followed Nick Morton around his property in New South Wales, chasing fallow bucks. So that film is called Mountain Monarch, where Nick takes a incredible fallow, like honestly a baby moose of a fallow deer, which we affectionately named Keith. But in that film, you see that we have an encounter with a one-antlered buck, which we affectionately called Uno.
So as you'll see in Mountain Monarch, that hunt was actually filmed in 2021. We have, as James was discussing, like this amazing encounter at within 20 meters of Uno. He's croaking and holding like a little mob of does on his scrape, and we actually snuck into 20 yards, all three of us. So Nick was there poised with the bow. We were actually hoping it was Keith, the target buck from that year, but unfortunately it was Uno, and at the time he was definitely a shooter, but he'd broken one antler. So Nick, being the bow hunter that he is, and obviously having some selection criteria, thought that on this private property that he has access to, the risk of, passing him up and then having him get shot by another hunter was fairly low. So he elected to obviously let him pass. We had this amazing encounter where we filmed him for probably 15 minutes or so, just going absolutely hard on his scrape, croaking, scraping up the ground, digging it up, urinating on himself, chasing other bucks around, which you can all see in our previous film series, Mountain Monarch, on the YouTube channel, Twin Elements YouTube. But yeah, we essentially like film that film, and it's amazing, and like those mountains for us hold a dear place in our hearts, just filming Nick over the years. But yeah, 12 months later, leading into this film, it's now April 2022, and as James was saying, we'd started getting trail cam photos in March of Uno, and Nick had sort of let us know, like, boys, get down here. I think this is the year where Uno is going to really pop, and he's got both antlers. Like, he had these cool little characteristics, which we'll be able to see in the film, and it was nice to just pattern a deer and go from, a potential shooter in 2021, unfortunately had that antler that was broken, to 2022. He really just popped and sort of got all these extra points. He had these gnarly kickers. He had extra points coming off his brow tine, just the extra added mass and weight of an extra year of growth. he didn't necessarily get any bigger in the palms or anything like that, which was interesting, like, which again tells us that he was probably at his prime for nutrition and genetics. Like, he probably wouldn't get too much bigger. If anything, maybe go backwards in actual antler length and palmation. But the weight was the characteristic that we sort of saw and were obviously attracted to, as well as that backstory of passing him up the year before. Like, for Nick, I think that was, you know, what set him out as his target buck. And you'll see throughout this adventure, like, we end up spending roughly 14 days over Fallow Frenzy, filming and hunting like mad. And all the experiences that we obviously captured, you'll be able to see in this 5-part series. And we just hope that, you know, the amount of effort and addiction for this sort of lifestyle and hunting really shines through in this film.
So as Ayden mentioned, this film took place over 14 days, which we've then put into 5 different parts. As you can imagine, during the rut, like, there's highs and lows. Some days are action-packed and some days are a bit quieter. And so we've really tried to summarize the whole hunt, I guess, and just showed sort of the glory days where the rutting activity was really good. But there was obviously times in between that were both mentally tough and truly required a lot of patience when it was a bit slow on the mountain. But we've sort of, just made the absolute highlight reel for you guys into this 5-part series. It was quite hard hunting, like, obviously having Ayden and I behind the camera that you can't see, and having Nick Morton in front of the camera, like having 3 people trying to move in, often through really thick scrub. At that time of year, the weeds were really high too. So you're all sort of, you know, breaking sticks, moving rocks and that type of thing. So getting 3 men moving in whilst trying to film does make things quite difficult at times. You've also got 3 different opinions on how, you know, a hunt, like 3, I'd say, quite experienced bow hunters as well. So, you know, you've got 3 different opinions and egos at times when we were out there hunting as well. So that added an extra dimension, I guess, to the hunt. It was pretty interesting. Often Ayden and I were you'd think that, you know, being brothers and stuff, we would be sort of, I guess, ganging up on Nick, but it was normally Ayden and Nick, or Nick and I ganging up on one of the others. I remembered fondly, there was a few times on the mountain we were all sort of in whispers, like, you know, do this or do that, or we should have done this, or and like, love them both dearly as best mates. And it was like an awesome time in the hills. I look back on it fondly, but it certainly was a big 2 weeks in terms of time on the mountain and getting up early and late starts, especially with the filming. It does just add a complete new dimension, I guess, when you've got to get up extra early to document, you know, those sequence of events that we take granted for, like eating breakfast. And then, you know, you film obviously the whole day, and then you've got to come back at night, and whether you're doing like setting up a time lapse, or whether you're just even, filming like transitioning, linking scenes, or like, you know, driving scenes in the dark, blah, blah, blah. Like, it just adds that extra dimension of complexity to a situation or environment that's already quite demanding. It was a big 2 weeks.
As you've said, like, it's hard enough getting one person to within bow range of, you know, like a mature animal. And that's like where this film, you'll see there's definitely the target buck, Uno. It eventuates that there ends up being a second buck who we sort of didn't really name or anything like that, but you identify him as the white buck. Like, he was just, he had this really pristine cape. He was like a light mental sort of deer. And honestly, he was a bit of like he was a bit of a show off. Like, the 2 bucks, as we'll sort of break down as we go through, like part 1, part 2, all the way through to part 5, towards the tail end of the hunt, you sort of identify that our target buck, Uno, ended up just being really quiet. I think was breeding does sort of in a bit of secrecy. And then on the other side of the mountain, you had this white buck in his territory, and being white and just flashy, and you'd see him from honestly like a kilometre and a half away across the other side of the valley, sort of parading around, croaking. And early in this trip, we definitely had set out that we wanted to shoot Uno. He was the buck that we'd identified as a mature animal. And that obviously carries out throughout the whole film. But as I was sort of discussing earlier, with 3 of us trying to get into bow range, it's hard enough with one person, let alone you just things that you can't take into account, like the amount of like scent and human odor that you're leaving around the mountains, or even if, you know, there are so many instances where we call young bucks in, or we're sitting on a scrape and a young buck or a spiker or a group of does come through, and we have these awesome encounters, but eventually, you know, those animals just do a loop around us, and because we're in their atmosphere, and they obviously can sense our presence after they've been around for 15 minutes. Like you can hide one person a lot better than you can hide three effectively, and that's just something that we obviously set out with the clear goal in mind to film and record it, and no doubt it would have been 100% different this hunt if Nick had gone about it himself. So that's where, like, we've had some magical hunts with Nick over the last 5-10 years now, and like we've really developed this great friendship with him, because we're all very similar in the sense of like we set these goals and we want to achieve them as a group. And like whilst sometimes it would be easier to just shoot a buck off film or shoot whatever, it is something that we all strive for and sort of keep each other accountable. And through that, when we do achieve like, the highest of highs, which like you can go back and watch Mountain Monarch from last year when we released it, the stoke and gratification that Nick has, like you can just see how proud he is of the accomplishment he's sort of achieved. And then obviously we're there to sort of celebrate with him and film it all. And that's just like memories that each of us will have in the bank until our last moments. But
I guess for us, I was just going to add and I think we discussed it in our first podcast actually, but it's like, I would rather shoot one animal on film with my brother, like filming it or something, than shoot 10 animals off film now. Cause it just means like so much more. And I think Nick, like when we're with us, obviously is the same. Like he will actually prioritize the filming side, which, Ayden and I are so thankful for, because it's pretty rare firstly to find someone, that is sort of a bit flamboyant, in terms of filming, and has a bit of flair about him and stuff. So you need like that interesting sort of character to emphasize the highs and lows of hunting, but can also really talk well with the camera, and is also a very good hunter as well. So finding someone like that, and then them willing to give up their sort of prime time hunting, it's a huge testament to Nick's personality, I guess. But yeah, jumping into the camera angles, we had 2 setups running. So I was set up on more of a run and gun style. I had the gimbal set up with sort of a short 24 to 70 mil lens, and I was there to capture more of the B-roll and like all the PTCs, like when Nick's actually speaking to the camera and that type of thing. Ayden had the big old clunky setup where he had set up on a tripod more of for I guess filming like the wildlife scenes and whatnot, and the actual sort of action, I guess, where he had, a camera set up with a big 150 to 600 mil lens. And that was obviously, designed for more actually filming the hunt, whereas I was sort of, filming the intricacies, I guess, and sort of the little B-roll connecting scenes of Nick walking and glassing and all those type of fun things.
And that's where, like, for us, it's super hard to give a full portrayal of what a hunt is like when it's just myself filming James or vice versa. Whereas for this hunt, it's one of the first hunts where you see, in our mind, like a complete bow hunt take place, where we're able to film that like point of view over the shoulder, which is probably one of the most important shots. But then which is what James was capturing over the shoulder of Nick in a lot of these encounters. So you see fallow deer come in, you've got the wide angle shot, Nick in the left-hand side corner, the buck or whatever in the right-hand side corner. You can see that whole scene and film and everything take place as it would if you were there in the flesh. And then with the affordability of having like 2 of us there, it just gives us, the close-up shots and those more intricate shots of that same buck. If he's croaking or scraping or rubbing a tree or whatever, we can do a lot more cuts and transitions as well and show you exactly what it would have been like if you could watch it through your eyes. So there's just so many benefits to that. But obviously with all these benefits, it's hard. You can't show the amount of effort and things like that are going on in the background. So like, each morning we were waking up at like 3:30 a.m. on these trips, and, it was giving ourselves way excessive amounts of time. Like normally we wouldn't have to. For example, I think it was getting light at like 5:30, 6 a.m. or something like that. But simply because we had 3 of us that needed to get ready, we had to film extra shots. We were packing up time lapses from the previous night, all these scenes that we have to sort of get, which we're doing. But even just like making brekkie in the morning when you're a bit groggy takes longer. But then we have to obviously go and grab all our batteries for the day, make sure they're all good, charging batteries, packing our own water, packing our own food, making sure our boots are dry, like making sure we've got enough gear in our bag. So there's all these things that you're doing regardless of if you're filming or not. And then you just add in all the extra little things and like obviously trying to film things and show this story and share it all for everyone's viewers and benefit later on. But it's just interesting because, you know, we would do from 3:30, you'd do all that, make coffees, do the batteries, do whatever, pack up your time lapses, clean lenses, all these sorts of things, sort of like, oh, do I need this mic? You know, listen back to footage of the previous night and say, oh, that was a bit rough. What do we have to do? And then, you know, you set out on the hill at 4:30 and you're hiking in the dark for an hour or two. And then it's hard to sort of give that perception in a film without losing the viewer's interest. Like, you can't just show Nick hiking up a mountain for 2 hours, but the effort that goes into doing that to be ready at prime time is just something that's like, it's hard to show and actually give off to you guys as the viewers.
Yeah, no one wants to see, you know, like often too, especially when we were actually hunting and targeting Uno in the first couple of films, like we would get there, and I think in one scene we showed that it was like 4:30 in the morning, for example. It was getting light at 5:30. We would get there well and truly before light and be halfway up the side of the mountain hoping to hear him croak. And honestly, I think he was croaking. I think we're just missing it, which we'll discuss in the future. But yeah, like we were putting in and doing everything we could to put ourselves in the best scenarios, especially knowing that obviously with 3 people, we had to take advantage of every opportunity we could get. So we were just trying to, I guess, like it's harder to capitalize on those opportunities. So let's try and maximize how many we get. And we were just doing that by, you know, pure grit, time on the mountain. And like we've discussed in previous podcasts with tips and tactics, like a great one is just getting up well and truly before light and trying to listen for croaks and roars. And then, yeah, moving in on them.
And that's where I think with 3 of us, like we identified in that Mountain Monarch series as well as early in this Fallow Frenzy series, that if we could get up to a buck before daylight, be within like 100 meters off him as he's croaking, and then slowly in that grey light just slip into his scrape, that's what gave us like the best efficiency in getting close and having these close encounters. It was sort of a bit harder when it is daylight, and when especially James and I are sort of trying to film all this behind the scenes, like movement and can you redo that? Can you walk up that? It's like we kill that prime time a little bit by trying to film. So forcing ourselves to get to a spot early, one, it has like the best wind and thermals. They're normally sucking straight down the hill. But 2, like we can often evade the eyes of those does, which are, as James was saying in that Fallow Rut podcast that we did a few weeks back, the does are the ones that are going to bust your stalks. And like being able to slip into, like, again, it takes a lot of dedication to get up at 3:30 and then a lot of dedication to get up the mountain when you haven't heard a croak in anticipation that hopefully he's going to start up on daylight. And we were rewarded for that quite often throughout this trip, where, you know, the effort and the forethought of just understanding these animals and knowing that they want to be on their scrapes by getting up there, getting ready, sort of having a bit of, you know, invested interest in doing everything right for the case that hopefully it does pay off. We were able to reap that reward and have some pretty cool encounters with bucks over the 14 days. Specialising in high-quality supplements and nutrition, from electrolytes and hydration add-ins to their wild bars, Atlas Wild helps to fuel our outdoor adventures. Their Regenerate lineup has been a game changer whilst hunting up north in the heat and humidity. It's perfect for those on the quest for hydration when losing lots of sweat. With grape, lemon lime, blue raspberry and orange flavours, there's something for everyone. Another favourite of mine is their Fusion lineup. It's my go-to for rest and recovery towards the end of a day. It's perfect for a big pack out. Now available in peach iced tea and lemon lime flavours. When shopping on the Atlas Wild website, be sure to use code TWIN10. That's TWIN 10 numerically for 10% off your next order. Obviously, over these 14 days, we get some like adverse weather and things like that. So like it'll be interesting to do a full film breakdown of just, you know, what goes into a day of filming. But like up in the mountains, the weather can be pretty inclement and change quite quick. It's obviously fickle. So there are some days when it just absolutely blows the gale, and audio quality can be really difficult to sort of to nail. And like in this trip, we obviously had the 2 camera setups running. We had lav mics, which for those of you who don't know are sort of, you'll see it on Nick. It's something that he has in his pocket, turns on. We've got like a wireless transmitter that goes back to the camera, and then a little mic on Nick that sort of, you know, obviously he can speak, and it's like right there on the side of his collar or on his bino harness or whatnot. And like behind the scenes here, like giving you guys an insight into it, we had, I reckon, about 10 little dead cat fluffy sort of like mic diffusers, I guess, is just the best way to describe it. Is like if you imagine your fist as the mic and then put a glove over your fist, it just softens the audio, makes it a lot less harsh and nicer. And I think we lost like 10 diffusers just because we're bush bashing, we're running up and down the mountains, like, and that was all, as James just said, under the mic. I don't know if you would have heard it, but we lost all of those 10 diffusers in the first 3 days purely just through hunting. And that's like the toll on the camera equipment is just next level. And like, if it's pissing down rain, we'd obviously love to record that and show you guys that we're out there during the rain, during the storms, during the whatever. But it's just not safe for the camera gear. And like when you've got a 14-day trip, you've got to prioritize it. So like for us, like dry bags are essential, rainproof gear, like we're still out there hunting. And that's the thing, like we want to obviously convey in these films is that we're like mad keen about it. And sometimes the best hunting is during the rain, but it's just not worth, wrecking your camera gear for this scene that you can barely even see through the lens, or the lenses are fogging up, or like one of the common occurrences with all this type of stuff is like, you'll have a battery that you're getting in on the scrape. You can hear the buck. So at about 50 meters, you'll be like, Nick, give me 1 second. I'm just going to change my battery. You change the battery. It's got 96% battery or something like that. And then you get up to the scrape, start recording, and then it just drops down to 3% because it's so cold and frigid out there on the mountain that, you've had this battery in your pocket or on your chest, like sitting close to your core, trying to keep it warm. But again, these batteries and camera equipment, they're fickle sort of things. They want to perform in the best conditions, but when it's raining or cold or whatever, or foggy and stuff, it can be a real nightmare. And then you're trying to like fix this camera or swapping cards because the card's full of 4K footage, and you're sitting there like mumbling to Nick, like, don't shoot, like it honestly, it's stuff that you wouldn't believe happens, but like old Murphy's Law, it's always when a buck comes into view or something like that the camera battery will go from, 100% to 10%, or the card will be from, quite, full to you've got a 15-minute encounter and you're filming most of this 15 minutes, like you need card space. So just all these little micro battles that you sort of don't even see or acknowledge are going on in the backgrounds. And that's where, like, again, testament to Nick, like we'll talk a little bit about Nick here in a second, but like he's just one of the most like understanding people I think I've ever met. Like he's so passionate about this, and no doubt like his success rates drop incredibly when we're there, but we also do like complement each other so well. And I think Nick knows that we obviously want him to shoot the bucks and things like that. And there are times that, again, behind the scenes, like you'll hear a doe call on the footage and go, oh, that was a great doe call timing by Nick. But it was actually James or I behind the camera still participating in the hunt. And like, I'm sure James now can talk about that Mountain Monarch film, but the big buck that Nick shoots at the end of that film, James actually behind the camera gives out a few doe calls, which pulls him up at 20 meters and Nick's able to shoot him.
Yeah, as he went to turn away, those like doe calls that you hear, not to say that Nick, because there's a lav mic also, and then I was running 2 cameras solo at the time when we filmed that hunt. And so the lav mic picks up Nick do the doe calls, but he's probably like 2 seconds after me. And I honestly question, like I wonder if, I know it's all hard to tell, like it might have ended up being a better shot angle because the shot angle I gave him was pretty tight amongst the weeds and stuff, but he obviously got a shot away and, shot an incredible fallow buck. But yeah, he went to turn and I just went, bing, bing. And then, he stopped, and then, because I could see Nick was at full draw and he got a shot away. Whereas, yeah, when Nick did it like 2 seconds later, had the same train of thought, just maybe, that second slower. And, whether it would have been, he would have been able to slot an arrow, I don't know. But at the end of the day, we got the buck, so that's all that really matters.
And that's where, for those of you that don't know Nick, obviously the people that have been following along with Twin Elements for a while would have seen like our earlier films, Mountain Boar Hunting with Relentless, which was a film that we did many years ago, where again, like Nick has cut his teeth on mountain boar hunting. This very same property first started off as just a boar and mountain billy goat sort of property. And over the last probably 5 to 10 years, it's really developed into a property where the fallow deer, after a bit of a drought, had trickled through and were looking for new country. And then it sort of settled there. And it's not like a massive population of deer, but the buck to doe ratio is actually pretty good, which, again, if you would have heard our fallow rut tactics, like that can sometimes be the most important for what drives a good rut. And over the last few years, as Nick's obviously started targeting, the fallow deer on this block, like we've had some really, really great hunts. And again, those hunts that we've done for deer with Nick recently, Nick's obviously carried through, and like he's been to the USA, South Africa, New Zealand, Europe, and obviously hunted quite a lot in Australia for like buffalo, pigs, all the deer species and whatnot. So Nick's a very accomplished bow hunter in his own right. And part of this, like we've formed such a valuable friendship through all of these adventures. Like Nick is one of the most disciplined, most hardworking hunters that we know or that you'll ever meet. Like he's one of those people that, we were obviously getting up at 3:30 to get the camera gear and things like that ready, but you never have to be like, Nick, or you get up, like it's day 10, get up out of your bed. It's like Nick's dedication to this pursuit of just a goal is relentless. And that's the way he actually conducts himself in life, like as a business owner and entrepreneur. Someone that works out hard, is, incredibly fit. He's marlin fishing. So I guess what we're trying to do here is just say, Nick's an obsessive like individual, and someone that we've shared plenty of amazing experiences with. And yeah, whether it's an animal with horns, tusks, or antlers, he's going to be essentially hunting it. So make sure you guys go over, give Nick a follow. I'm sure we're going to have plenty of hunts in the future that we can often talk about on the podcast and look back on.
Okay, we went to Argentina together, spent a couple of ruts together, did reds here and then done 2 lots with fallow, and then just, chittle hunts and whatever else. And honestly, I think it's just his persistence and dedication. Like he's human like all of us, like we all stuff up on hunts, but I think including Ayden and I think the factor that underpins all 3 of us and makes us quite successful hunters, I guess, is just that persistence factor and the willing to do, go that extra mile, do that extra hard sort of task, which puts you into a position or gets you that extra opportunity that you then capitalize on. And that's why we just love hunting with Nick, because it's never like nothing's ever a problem. Like nothing's ever, too hard to accomplish, or let's do this, or let's stay out further, or let's get up earlier, or, all that type of stuff. Let's, go further up the ridge. Like everything's like, yep. Like if it's going to get us, in that opportunity, or if it's going to give us that opportunity, or if it might even just be off a whim or whatever, like he's keen to do it to try and get the result that he wants. And he's, like Ayden said, like he's the same with his business and same with his hunting and his fishing. And that's why we've grown such a great friendship with Nick. So I'll always be thankful for that.
I think it's pretty funny. Like I look back on some of these hunts and it's not necessarily the buck that we shoot or the boar that we shoot or these cool encounters, but it's like we've got a bit of an inside joke from New Zealand many, many years ago where we played like the Lord of the Rings soundtrack on our phones on like the death march out in the pitch black off the mountain, and half of us are falling down gullies, down rock cliffs, and the other 2 go down and, try and wrangle them out of a blackberry thicket or whatnot. And the other one's, bleeding from somewhere, and you're trying to identify where that cut is, and they're laughing, and, you've just got the Hobbit soundtrack in the background.
Yeah.
The amount of times we've gone to edit like an early morning breakfast scene and you can't even use the audio of Nick talking because there's like the Misty Mountain. There's something like Lord of the Rings, the Shire, Fellowship of the Ring edition or something like that, or there's the Misty Mountain from The Hobbit playing in the background. You've just got to scrap all this footage, but you just sit there and laugh. And like, again, going back to behind the scenes where like we're waking up at 3:30, a lot of these hunts, we hunt right up until dark, until, that last few seconds. We're sitting there trying to get intel that's going to shape how we're going to go about the next morning's hunt. Did he stay there? Is there another buck croaking over there? Whatever. And then it's funny because, again, we can't really show you in a film, like people would lose interest, but like we walk off the mountain for the next 2 hours to get back to camp or back to the car to drive back to camp. And then it's just, by the time you do that, you set up a time lapse, you sort of talk tactics for the next morning, charge batteries, like it's 11 p.m. and you're like, all right, we've only got 4.5 hours of sleep till we do it all again. And that's where like that camaraderie and having the same goal, and like it goes back to anything in life. Like we did that resolutions podcast a few weeks ago where if you have mates that are going to keep you accountable and are high value people, like where, again, like you're going to relate best to people who are just at a core level very similar to you. And that's where like all of our goals in this film and with Nick are so relatable to one another, where it's like if Nick shoots a buck, it honestly feels like we all shoot the buck. And if we capture that film, like that sequence on film, we all celebrate that, and that links us together for the next, 20 years as we're, like we're going to talk about it forever. And hopefully, it honestly feels like an extension of our hands going out to you guys now with these films where like you can relive our experiences. You can listen to the Fallow Rut podcast, the Red Raw Tactics podcast, and like send us your success stories, because that's what, as a community, when you get people that are all like-minded and feeding off each other and succeeding, like that pie of success just keeps growing and there's more slices to it. Like, and that's the biggest thing with this hunting community and stuff is like, Nick and I initially met years and years ago as complete strangers who sent each other an Instagram DM and then went on a hunt. And then from that hunt, we were like, mate, this guy's cool. Let's go and do the next, I was at uni and stuff, like let's next school holidays go and catch up. And again, now it's like years and years later and we've done international trips together. We've shared tents and bloody backpacking sort of hostels in New Zealand, trying to dry our clothes out and shit. It's just, you've just got to meet these like-minded people and run with it.
Yeah. Now it's years and years later and I'll try and call him to organise something. He won't even answer my phone call. So yeah, no, we, as you can tell, we've got a lot of time for Nick. We all know that when it comes to great tasting coffee in the outdoors, you look no further than Dog and Gun Coffee. Their preloaded drip filters are renowned for taking cafe-grade coffee into your hunting camp. But your favourite flavours can also be enjoyed at home with their whole bean variety. Use code TWIN10, that is TWIN, 10 the number, to get $10 off your first order. I think we should roll on into the actual film now and just break down. So we've got 5 parts here. So we've got some overall lessons and a few behind the scenes stuff later on that we're going to share. But we're just going to break down the actual 5 films. We've sort of time-stamped stuff as well, just to, when you do watch the films and stuff, you can either remember, the rough timing or area, or be like, oh yeah, okay, cool. I see that, or see what the boys were talking about here, and just give you a bit more insight into events that happen during each film.
So again, like going back to the biggest takeaway from our Fallow Rut podcast, and I know I mentioned it a lot, but there's just so many little nuggets of knowledge in there. As James said, like respect the does. Like you'll see throughout this 5-part series, there's a number of instances where, at the time we were looking through tiny little viewfinders on the back of a camera or through the electronic viewfinder raised to our eye. And weren't exactly quite sure of what happened, but then having the luxury of going back in post and watching it on laptops and big screens and things, you can see the exact moment that a doe pins us and then the stalk is essentially over. Like we've worked so hard to get to that point, crawling up there in the dark, sitting off them for an hour, finally going, yep, the wind's good, we're going to sneak in now, just to have it all fooled by a doe. So that slow and steady approach seemed to work best for us over the rut. Every time we had a really good thought out like stalk, you'll see within this film, we'll just give it away now for those that are listening, but there are 3 really efficient, quick, clean bow kills in this whole 5-part series. And most of them are actually when it's like a really dedicated stalk, like, okay, there is the buck. We're going to just do everything over the next, like wind permitting, everything to get into range, and we're not going to rush it. It's just, we're going to make every tactful decision, like all the 1%ers. And again, that's just, I know it's easy to get caught up in the fallow rut when there are bucks croaking and stuff and trying to approach them quickly. But if you can learn from us and learn from this film, and again, we've learned from it. We're big enough to admit that every year that we hunt, we learn hundreds of new things, and that's where we're trying to pass it on to you guys. But that respect for the does is probably the biggest takeaway in all of this.
Yeah, and we'll I edited these 5-part films, so we'll actually break down and sort of tell you the stalks and exactly when it happens, so that you guys can have that in the back of your mind when you're actually watching the film. And like we've already alluded to, like there was 3 of us stalking in, so it's one thing to say, oh yeah, we're getting seen by does, but it's like, it's not like having an extra person there. It's not like it's twice as hard. Like it's exponentially harder. So then making it where there was 3 people trying to sneak in, and sometimes there was limited cover, sometimes we had good cover. But the point is, like 3 people sneaking in, that's like so much more noise, so much more movement. And, it doesn't surprise me that we're getting, pinned all the times by does, but that's where, and we'll get into it more, but that's where like the stalks that we actually sort of probably took our time more were the ones that we were successful on. But with this first film, something that I just wanted to raise, and it's really the first morning that you see in part one, but it also can be extrapolated out to the first couple of films, which probably reflects the first 4 to 5 days of the hunt. Was you note that every time we went to cross the mountain or went to move somewhere, that we'd notice that Uno, our target buck, would spark up. And I honestly think it was just like the acoustics of the mountain per se, where like we could hear the white buck who was on the other side of the valley clear as day, like all the time. And it wasn't until like our target buck, I honestly believe the scrape that he ended up setting up on and we had the encounter on was probably maybe 400 meters around the hill from the one that we had the trial cameras on. So it wasn't like that crazy far away, but I think it was just like having the valley folds between us and stuff. Like we'd lose his croaks. And so often it wasn't until we'd like go to the white buck side, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, our target buck's croaking. But I think it's just because we were sitting on a scrape and we just like couldn't hear that he was actually croaking. So that's one thing to take into account, when you're actually trying to, in this case, like we were trying to target the two biggest bucks in a very large area. But yeah, just one thing to take into account, like when you can't hear croaks or like, where moving around, especially at first light, two different potentially glassing points or, listening ridges in the first thing in the morning is definitely going to be a handy tool to try and locate, new areas or where bucks are croaking. Whereas if you go to the same spot on the mountain every time at first light, like I think you're going to be missing croaks.
And I think part of the hesitation initially, like you'll see our moral like debate every morning was, we know this buck's there because of the trail cameras. He's using this ridge. We haven't spooked him. We can like sometimes hear him as we're going up to him, but then it always just went quiet as we got up towards this scrape. And sometimes it was from 200 or 300 meters away. So we knew we hadn't actually busted the does yet. But then as James was saying, as we got closer to where we thought he was, like I think the folds in the mountain, like if you can imagine, putting your palms together and making a V between your left and right hand, in the mornings we'd park the car in the middle of the V and we'd hear him on the left-hand side. So we'd run up that mountain, get up there in the dark and be sitting there. And everything on the left-hand side of that, our hands, was just completely quiet. Whereas on the right-hand side, like you could hear that white buck croaking. And again, there was airspace between us and that white buck, sometimes of like a kilometre. And you could hear him in the real still mornings where there was no wind, perfectly clear. And then as soon as you're like, all right, let's bail off the mountain, bail off this plan where we've been sitting on a scrape waiting for this buck to croak up on our side, you'd get down to where the car is. And I think just because you'd like got rid of all those sort of topographical folds and there was just airspace between you and the buck, like he was able to project straight out into that V or that valley, you would hear him again and you're like, all right, shit, let's get back up there. But we would do that and get up there, and then it was sort of like a weird time in the morning where the thermals were changing. So we're like, all right, the thermals are starting, the sun's starting to hit the valley and we'll go up above him. But then to get to where we knew he was now, it was always just like a mission. And again, with three of us, and like the biggest like underpinning thing in this hunt was just the weeds this year. We'd had like a phenomenal year of growth, and there was a lot of sort of like summer rainfall and stuff that just meant that there were all these woody weeds that had grown. And again, like you'll see scenes in this film where like Nick's arms are just covered with, grass seeds and things because the grasses were up to our shoulder height in some of these valleys and these gullies. And then trying to trudge through there with three of us, it's like we knew the buck was there, but we'll sort of like, again, we knew that we had 14 days or so, like a couple of weeks to like try and get this done. So we were probably nearly a little bit too like standoffish in the first couple of days. And as you'll see, like we had this white buck, which, was clearly strutting around, grunting, just dominating a hill opposite us in a quite stalkable open spot. Because it wasn't initially our target buck, we were sort of there a little bit stubborn, being like, nah, we're going to sit on this scrape until, it was like our downfall. We're going to sit on this scrape until our target buck comes back. And like we had no real intel that he was actually using it during the day. Like we did have trail camera footage of him using it up until a couple of hours before first light and like a couple of hours after dark and stuff, but it was all nocturnal use. And we think that he was living on that side of the mountain, obviously. But then, when there was a cool period where he wasn't with does, he'd just come and touch up a few of the scrapes along that ridge. So that was probably a bit of a learning curve. Like if it's not happening and you're doing the same things, like obviously change it up.
Yeah, I definitely think and that's where the filming can take into play and implement like strategies and change things. Because I think if we weren't targeting Uno, then we probably like on the first day would have been across that valley on the white buck. Like if we were just actually what I would say, like, I put my hand up in like air quotes and say hunting, because obviously, we had the prior history with Uno and stuff like that, had that lead up footage. So we're very much like sort of targeting him as our main target buck for this video and stuff. Whereas, like if Nick was probably there by himself or any other hunter, like that white buck was, also a very equally incredible and fantastic trophy. So I think anyone else would have just been straight on that other side of the mountain. It probably would have opened up more opportunities for you early on. But we obviously being very dedicated to sort of the filming series, I guess, and trying to have that background history with Uno, stuck it out and stayed at the scrape, trying to get that buck to come in or get an opportunity and get him done on film. Another sequence in the film that I wanted to flag more as a bit of a tip for some people was Nick's obviously he's more of a Nick's a pig hunter. Like Nick loves hunting boars. He's like, I remember him saying during this filming series, he's like, it's the only time bloody during the year that I'll ever walk past a pig, when the rut's happening sort of thing. So there's plenty to learn off Nick in terms of his pig hunting. Like he's very successful. He knows that property very well. He puts in the work obviously too, but he's spent so much time amongst the pigs. And so he understands them very well. But what you'll see him do, and I've timestamped it for 6 minutes and 36 seconds, is Nick actually does like what would call a boar squeal. Like it's not like a piglet or anything like that. And when boars are actually fighting, like when you hear that, it's going to blow out the mic, so I'm not going to do it. But when you actually hear like boars fighting and stuff, that's boars screaming at each other and stuff. And normally it's actually one dominant boar screaming at other pigs to say like, piss off sort of thing. And so Nick actually does that to relocate the mob. Like we'd sort of lost them. We knew they were in this rough area, like probably within 150, but we were sort of standing on an open bench and weren't really sure exactly where they'd gone. And Nick sort of did this squeal. I increased the volume so that you guys can hear it in post when we're hunting. But this boar that Nick ends up shooting actually like squeals or, roars or whatever you want to say, like back at us, which was pretty cool. And so that was huge. Like I learned, I'd never really, seen anything like that personally. And Nick said that it's had really good success. I know the guys up at Kogu Adventures and stuff like that has had success with similarly like squealing at boars or doing boar squeals or whatever, either just to get a boar to come in. Like if they see a boar come off the swamp, they might try it if he's got like big swollen nuts and that type of thing. But also, it's like very much hit and miss. Like they might just walk off, but they might. But when there's like a running mob, it can be used to locate them in thick bush. But I've also done it a couple of times with really good success where you're walking along in really thick cover and you bust a boar out. And where it's actually worked really well for me is where, you're walking along thick, like really, I'm talking like tight, thick gullies, and you bust a boar out and then you're glassing and you're trying to, have a look, and then you take another 30 steps or another 100 steps, and you actually bust another boar out, like a different boar that was in a bed. And what I've actually done is like almost like literally a boar squeal, similar to what Nick did in the video. And I've had boars like straight away do that back to me. And it's that, it's taking that, what do you sort of question out? And in most of the time you're in such thick cover that it hasn't actually worked. But I've had boars, like one in particular actually shot because it came back to me and I could actually could actually shoot it because it was like obviously hyped up or whatever. And because normally when boars are all bedded up together, there is a potential that there could have been a sow and heat there or whatever. It's sort of like a really high density of pigs and stuff. So the running activity, you don't know, like it could be quite high. But just a tip and tactic to have in the back of your mind to use when you are hunting boars or running pigs.
Originating in Texas, USA, Numa Outdoors has formulated a durable, breathable, quiet and comfortable camouflage lineup for all terrain, seasons and pursuits. You may have seen us across our socials running the new Renegade lineup in our recent Northern Territory adventures. That's because the Renegade lineup is perfect for early season, hot and humid conditions in the heat. We're pleased to announce that the Numa camouflage lineup is stocked exclusively by Venture Hunting and Outdoors here in Australia and available now. Head to their website to check out the whole range today. So that rutting boar activity sort of rounds out part one, which, as I said, now you'd be able to watch. It's been released last week, Wednesday, and part two is going to come out this Wednesday, just after you're hopefully hearing this episode drop. So that brings us into part 2 of Fallow Frenzy, where, to be honest, this morning we effectively get sort of fogged out. The mist and fog was just so dense, and this sort of epic blanket of just white cloud almost right down in the valley floor. So we could hear grunts and things like that, but the visibility was like ridiculous. Like we tried to film parts of it as it sort of cleared, and just to give you guys perspective, but we sort of put the cameras away and we're just sitting there sort of, again, with that dense blanket of fog. It was almost like the air pressure and everything had changed, and like the normal wind patterns just weren't reliable. So we sort of effectively try to like get out of there, not really spook anything, and then elected to sort of bail off that side of the mountain and go to a completely different corner of the property that we hadn't really checked out to that point in the rut. And we're glad we did, because as you'll see, we sort of go and find where there's another buck grunting. And then again, by the time we moved over there, it's mid-morning, the buck actually shut down. We'd seen plenty of goats, pigs, other deer traveling on the mountainside that morning. Got a little bit of footage, and then we decided, look, it's sort of actually heated up. The activity's gone quiet. We'll go back to camp. But when we returned to that spot that afternoon with the anticipation of hunting that boar as the evening cooled down, that buck, as the evening cooled down, sure enough, as soon as we sort of got settled in, we heard a croak and made our way towards it. And then it's one of those things with the evenings and afternoons, it's like that race against the clock that you've got in the back of your mind. So like for me as a bow hunter, I much prefer the morning stalks where I can locate game, get in on them. And then if I need to, I've got all day to try and get it done. Whereas again, in the afternoons, like they're normally bedded or just a light bit of activity, and then they start moving and feeding, and it's often away from you. So you're continually playing this game of like cat and mouse, trying to catch up to them. But if you want to jump towards about 6 minutes 30, 6 minutes 40, somewhere in that ballpark of part 2, you'll be able to see what I talk about here. And we actually, again, this is where in hindsight, we thought it was like a young buck that passes through in front of us. It's this young chocky buck, what we termed. And Nick passes him up. We have this awesome encounter with like a great fellow buck where he comes through. We actually heard him on a scrape, let out a croak, and we gave a doe call from about 100 yards away, and he comes right into another scrape that we were sitting off. Beelines right past us at about 10 yards, and as you see in the footage, Nick would have been able to take that buck if he had have decided to. But it wasn't actually until sort of like hindsight where we watch back the footage, and like that buck had sort of short stunted antlers, but the maturity and mass on him was actually quite impressive. Like he was actually quite an old buck. But the reason I've mentioned this is not as like a learning experience. Like again, Nick was completely happy to pass him up, but it's more just, I wanted to allude to that buck to doe ratio. So if Nick had have shot this buck, which you'll see in the footage he was very capable of doing, the next chain of events sort of wouldn't have been set in motion. And this just comes back to what we were talking about in that Fallow podcast a couple of weeks ago with the buck to doe ratio. And if you are keen on getting some meat or shooting something, and it's not the buck that you're after, try and pass up the bucks and the spikers and things like that and shoot does. It's just going to enhance your rut, because we let that buck go. He obviously went around the mountain and then sort of popped up on the other side of the ridge. And I think his presence actually got another buck in the area in the vicinity to spark up. And then suddenly, from passing up a buck that we didn't really quite want to shoot, we've now got another stalk on our cards. And that is just a testament to, like, you don't have to shoot every single thing that you see in the bush. We'll often stop for a kookaburra eating a mouse or a kookaburra eating a lizard. And then by watching that, a big boar just walks past that you would have missed if you had have kept going down that game trail trying to charge off and get to the next spot. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think things happen for a reason in the bush, and the more like patient and deliberate you are, and like just appreciative of, sit there and watch the roos. Don't just bump through them, because you don't know the trickling and cascading effects of like your actions in the bush. But essentially, around that 9 to 10 minute mark of this part 2, we get onto this second buck, and I might even let James take it over from here and just like give a bit of an insight into that stalk, because again, I was on the big camera a little bit further back recording like a separate view. But I just want you to focus in on, if you do watch the footage, part 2, which is coming out this week, just watch the moment that it sort of leads to us being able to shoot this buck, where that chocky buck that we passed up, minutes earlier, have done this big, long, elaborate stalk to get into range. He actually is the reason why we shoot this, other mature buck seconds later, sort of.
Now we're talking about, like that 7 to 10 minute mark. And it wasn't actually, it was a fair bit longer. So I remember, that stalk between the chocky buck and actually the mental buck that Nick ends up shooting, was about 40 minutes long. So it was like a crazy, because Ayden, and I know it was if not longer, because I know that because we sort of perched Ayden up probably about 100 meters away with the big lens to, sort of film the event and sort of get that wildlife stuff in the wider angle. And then me and Nick moved in because we just agreed, like, firstly, it was noisy as hell. There was so much thick bush. There was sort of roos, wombats, deer, like everything around. Like, it was actually a really hard stalk. But the thing is, we just went so slowly, and Nick and I actually like belly crawled on our hands and knees for, over half an hour, just trying, as you can see in the film. Like, obviously it's shortened. But yeah, it was our longest stalk. And we just crawled and crawled and crawled and crawled and crawled. And it's incredible. Like, we often think like, oh yeah, like the deer, you bust them, or, they move frantically and stuff. And that comes back to like us. Like, honestly, they don't actually move around that much. Like, I think that often when deer, especially bucks, move off scrapes, it's because we've scared them. And that's where, like, if you took twice the amount of time, well, you'd probably be in a better position at the end of it. And that's what happened with us. Like, we, after so much crawling through all these like little thick bushes that were just like prickly as all hell. Like, I remember just being like spike, stab. Yeah, we got ourselves into a position where we were about 50 meters off this buck. He was up on top of the ridge with a couple of does. And so Nick let out a couple of doe calls, and he sort of was croaking, like looking down at us and stuff, but wouldn't commit, I guess. He's like, mate, I've got my girls here. Why am I going to like walk down to you? You know how this works. The does come to the buck, so you sort of come to me. We had this bit of an open bench, so we couldn't really cross it with the position they were at. So and the wind was good, and so we were just being patient. We were just sitting there. And the thing that you'll see in the video that actually got him to commit is that chocky buck that we'd had, the older buck, or old buck, as we discovered now in hindsight, actually crosses the gully and comes up with all this commotion that's going on, because we were doe calling, the does themselves were doe calling because the buck was chasing him and stuff. Like, there was a lot of activity around, and this chocky buck comes up, and then that was enough for the buck that Nick actually that he shoots to be like, oh shit, like, I've got to be defensive here and go and defend this doe that I don't know, that's singing sweet melodies at me, I guess. And so he walks down the hill, and then ends up like we doe call him in, and Nick shoots him sort of quartering on it. Oh, I don't know, it was about 15 meters. It was pretty cool actually. Like, the buck runs past Nick when it dies, and like, honestly, Nick could have put his arm out and like grabbed the buck, which was pretty cool. So yeah, it made for like a really sick stalking sequence. But yeah, it just highlights like really taking that time on the stalk. And yeah, we honestly, I can say we did every single thing right. Like, we took our time. We didn't, like, we could have got up and like stretched our backs and maybe done that like half awkward, stalk in or whatever, but we like prioritized like belly crawling up this mountain, trying not to turn rocks, like trying to, getting like, is it prickly acacia or whatever? But yeah, just getting absolutely stabbed by all these tiny little thick bushes. And like, we did everything right and did everything in our power to do everything right, and obviously got the reward at the end of it.
I think what's interesting and sort of has to be said here as well is that with this buck, he wasn't actually really on our radar. It was a bit of a chance encounter, and we kind of went, oh yeah, he's cool. He's got a big cleft on his, one left-hand side palm or something, and his right palm was actually quite good, and he was definitely a mature buck, but I think he was past his prime too. And to be honest, there probably wasn't that like lust factor. Like, we weren't like, oh, we have to shoot him. Like, one, for the film, which is like something that, to be honest, like, it does motivate us. We want to get this film and like, capture a hunt on film. But I think like Nick was like, it was weird. I think being able to take a step back and not put so much emotion into like, oh, that's my target buck, like, I've got to get him now before he disappears, is like a massive thing. And it did allow us to go, okay, whether we shoot him or not, we're just going to have a really cool encounter and a really good stalk, but let's not do anything that's going to end this stalk prematurely, because if we can shoot him, it will be great. And being able to like, again, separate yourself and go like, logically, let's just do every single thing patiently and correctly. And it again, like as James just said, like doing everything right over a long period of time, like led us to this point where we shot this buck in what was probably the most technical stalk that we did in the whole film for the 14 days. And it was probably the hardest stalk or the hardest opportunity, just because there was quite a lot of thick cover, and then this massive open bench that the buck had, these does on. And by, again, being very calculating and doing the hard yards, being patient, like you see, we end up taking that buck. And again, part 2 sort of concludes with us taking all the meat. And like, again, I'll try and be quick, because we always cop these YouTube comments like, oh, you didn't take any meat, or you didn't take much meat, or blah, 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 blah. And it's like, you will see, like, we hang up 2 deer legs at the end of that, but like we can guarantee you, like, every morsel from that buck was taken out off the mountain between mine, Nick, and James's packs. Like, you know, just because you see us cutting out the back straps but don't see them back at camp doesn't mean we just threw them in the bush or something like that. Or just because you didn't see us take the ribs doesn't mean the ribs didn't come back, and these sorts of things. It's like to try and give you guys perspective as to, again, you're watching, you know, part 2 of a 5-part series of a 14-day trip. So the magnitude of footage that we get and stuff, it's like, 1, you physically can't record everything again because of camera batteries. 2, you can't physically show everything. So you're just getting these tiny little glimpses. And again, it's like, we don't want to bore people necessarily with the dark footage of a pack out where we get back at 11 p.m, hang the meat and jump straight into bed. Do you know what I mean? Like, just to do it all again the next morning for part 3.
I think it's also catering to like the wider audiences, in the sense that like cutting out a backstrap is very, I don't want to say artistic, but it's like, it's very clean. Like, it's like, okay, yep, that's like, you know, there's not a lot of hair in it. There's not guts in it, obviously. Like, you know, generally it's sort of zoomed in. So it's just like a hunk of meat. And we're really, with that, we're trying to like cater to the wider audience in terms of like, there are people that like the hunting side, you know, just similar to like why people watch Meat Eater, for example, that don't really want the blood and gore and like that diehard hunter, like butchering, all that type of stuff, that watch our films. So like, have that in mind, in the sense that like, you know, yes, like in this sense, like we cooked up took the ribs and cooked up the ribs, which was sick, but it's just like, you know, you don't need to see me with a saw, like a little hand saw, like hacking out the ribs on this bark with like, you know, the gut pile normally like a meter away or whatever. And then like, you've got like this half broken down deer sitting there in the dirt and stuff. Like, we are trying to sort of convey hunting and this lifestyle in the best light, I guess. So it's just like, you know, having that in mind when you're actually watching the film, where it's like, you know, we can assure you we took all the meat, because Ayden and I pretty much, that's all we eat. Like, we always prioritize and just pretty much eat wild game at home. So yeah, we do try and take as much meat as possible, but it's just like trying to show that in the best light to our viewers and cater to the widest audience possible as well. Need a caffeine hit? We've got you covered. Power your passions with OzCaff Energy. Designed to be convenient, discreet and portable, these small caffeine pouches pack a punch and will get you out of those lows in no time. Place one of the pouches under your top lip for rapid absorption with added benefits of 0 calories and 0 sugar. There's nothing to lose. Use code TWINELEMENTS for 10% off your next order.
Alrighty, so transitioning to part 3. Now, this film, we're going to be very upfront about it. We want to see who's got a keen eye and want to hear if anyone notices anything in the film that's a little bit odd. We noticed it ourselves in the post-processing thing, but we decided not to edit it out. We actually had a bit of a chuckle and thought it was pretty funny and had a bit of banter between ourselves, our viewers and our listeners. So you guys on the podcast are obviously hearing this film breakdown podcast. We want to see if anyone can send us a message with like a timestamp as to hopefully what we're alluding to. Hopefully this doesn't open up an avenue for you guys to pick apart the film
here we go.
And give us 100 different feedbacks saying, oh, color grading was off here or this or this. It's not anything to do with like color grading or
audio
or
anything
anything like that. It's just a visual thing that you will see in the film if you got a keen eye and laugh. Like, it's just...
I didn't see it, to be honest. Ayden, it was actually our final export where, you know, so the way, like, it's such a long process doing their videos, but, you know, you do each step and then you export it. You know, I watch it and Ayden watches it, and then we say, yep, we need to fix the color grading or the audio on this and blah, 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 get everything right. That's normally a couple of exports to get to this point. And it was actually the last one. So you think like I've probably spent 50 hours on this film and, sent this to Ayden for the last one. I'd actually watched it and was like, yep, I'm happy with it. Ayden watched it and he's like, did you notice this? I didn't believe him. I was like, nah. And I had to go back and look at it and I just laughed. So anyway, we talked about it. We've left it in there as a little behind the scenes cut. It's pretty funny actually. But yeah, I'd be keen to see you guys. If you see what we're talking about, send us a message. It's worth a laugh.
Yeah, we'll give you a hint. Like it's in acting. Some movies, like a lot of people would have seen Deadpool, where the actor breaks the third wall and sort of like looks at or talks to the camera. It's got something to do with that. But again, this was completely unintentional. Like we were there to film Nick, and that's it. So yeah, please let us know. Send us a comment or DM or something like that, and it'll be pretty funny to revisit that. But part 3, to be honest, is sort of where in the trip where we've been there for probably 4 or 5 days now. It's been a couple of days, and in reality, we're trying to like feel like we've got a bit of a sense of what's going on. We've taken like a nice mature deer, but not our target buck. And now we're getting back to the point of like, all right, we've by this stage sent a couple of arrows. We've got a nice boar on the deck, which was just, a bit of a fluke, and capitalizing on the opportunity. We've got this nice mature buck. Let's go and put some time into our target buck again. The fog had cleared and all those sorts of things. So again, as we alluded to earlier, we had this bizarre sort of like conundrum where whichever side of the valley we would go to, a buck was croaking on the other side. And as soon as we went onto the side that buck was, it would seemingly go quiet. We'd go to where the other buck was calling, and it was honestly like being in a yo-yo. Like you'd go to the left-hand side of the mountain and the right-hand side buck would croak. You'd go run down the mountain after doing, 1,000 meters of elevation, and then the left-hand side buck would croak. And you're like, you just felt like you couldn't win. Like as soon as you went onto that side, and again, talking about the folds, like the bucks would go quiet. So at this point, we sort of said to ourselves, like, we're going to target we're going to target Uno, and we're going to target the white buck. Both of them we identified as shooters, and whichever buck was croaking, we were just going to go and like dedicate some stalks to. And as you see in part 3, we basically have our first, encounter with Uno.
So it was a pretty cool encounter. We ran down the mountain as Ayden was describing, and then we actually hear Uno croaking, and we're like, okay, sick. So we run straight back up the ridge. And what we get into position, there was a little valley a little fold in the mountain, I guess, between us. Like we obviously thought about thermals and winds and blah, blah, blah in the setup. And what we were going to do is come in level with him and use this little fold, this little gut as sort of a way to get up there. And what we didn't realize, and this is like, I guess, the beauty of hindsight with filming and stuff like that, is none of us saw it, but I could see it in hindsight. So when we're actually moving in on the buck, you'll see the first scene where Nick goes, there he is, like 50 meters away, blah, blah, blah. And you actually, if you look really closely when Nick says it, I can't remember, but in the bottom left-hand corner in one of those scenes where he's like, there he is, like you can actually see his antlers like move through like some brush or whatever. Like he's only 50, 60, 70 meters away or whatever. But in a scene before that, we'd actually sort of probably got a bit excited, like knowing that it was most likely going to be him, because there's no guarantee. Like we just had a croaking buck on that side of the mountain. It could have been any buck, but we sort of knew that it was most likely going to be him with the deer densities and stuff there. And I think that probably let us get, we got a bit excited when we were moving in. Like I said, we didn't see it at the time, but we saw it afterwards. But we actually scare a doe like plain as day. Like we're coming, like moving in on this croaking buck, and that's the thing. Like you get excited, you're moving on a croaking buck, and looking back at the footage, like what you can see Uno's antler, if you look close enough, like you actually see this doe just staring at us straight up the hill, and then she bounds off first. So that is not actually in the film, because it was some pretty wild filming with me, like keeping up with Nick, and then Ayden trying to keep up with me, and blah, blah, blah. And then Nick obviously sees the buck, but he's actually walking off to follow that doe. So we actually scared Uno off his scrape. And that's like an important consideration, I guess, in the sense that what you see is Uno with, a younger buck and a spiker, but he's set up probably about 100 meters off his scrape. And that's the importance of this is, like, if that was a red deer in that situation, that stalk is done. Like that hind, just say if she'd seen us, she would run off and be gone, and that stag most likely would not roar again. So like they would probably go to a different mountain. If not, they'd be over the side of the hill or down the gully or whatever. Like they're putting miles between you and them. Right. So that's the first thing. The second thing, because it's a fallow deer, like that buck wants to actually hold that hot doe to that scrape. So she's seen us. She's probably going to run off and go like, nah, stuff this. I saw those 3 blokes coming down the hill. But what he'll do, like a horse, like he'll round up that doe. And so he's trying to hold her there. And he obviously, accomplished that, and he's kept that doe there, but they've gone, 100 meters away. That younger doe, then that younger buck obviously then had the opportunity to move down, and he's probably like that spiker and younger buck is probably the reason why Uno is croaking, to say, like, this is my girl, piss off. And so that younger spiker has then taken the opportunity to come down and, like, he went and ended up checking up the doe, checking out the scrape. But yeah, the whole reason why Uno wasn't just on his scrape where he would have been with the doe, like he would have just been running laps around that with the doe, was because we'd initially pushed him off. And then we got this second chance because we'll try to hold her to that scrape or that area so he could breed her, because he obviously didn't see us and understand it was the doe that ran off. And it was the young bucks that kept him croaking. Now, and this is the benefit of hindsight, like, we didn't end up shooting Uno, and that was definitely our best opportunity, but we didn't end up shooting Uno for the trip or in that situation, because he comes back to sort of say piss off to the younger bucks, but he doesn't actually commit. And that's where maybe in hindsight, and this could have gone one of two ways, but maybe in hindsight, if we'd done some doe calling, that would have drawn the spiker and the young buck, which was only like 20 meters from us, towards us. But then it also could have put a bit more pressure on Uno to come as well, to sort of come and check us out. It's like, oh, what's that doe or whatever. And then the younger bucks inevitably probably would have spooked. But it may have just sort of opened things up it was probably a bit of a high, like what we did was more of a probably conservative approach, I guess, whereas it would have been like higher risk, higher reward, in the sense that like, yeah, Uno could have rushed over to be like, oh, but he also would have had to have left his doe, which was hot, unguarded. So, I mean, it's all this hindsight because we obviously didn't get him. But yeah, in that situation, we obviously could have put more pressure on Uno to commit if we doe called.
Realizing that the stakes are higher because this is our target buck now, and he was well within 100. I think James used a scale of 100, but like he was closer than that when he was croaking there. And you'll see there's this pretty iconic scene in part 3 where like the camera's set up on this Uno, our target buck, which is coming and materializing out of the background, and like framing him is this little buck looking at him going like, shit, I'm going to turn into that in a couple of years. Like it was pretty cool. Like you're looking over the shoulder of this little buck, and then in the background there's Uno just projecting his dominance at this younger buck, and croaking and stuff. And I think it's interesting because in hindsight, like I honestly think like, yeah, if we had a doe called, Uno was in the mood where like he'd just come off that scrape. Like we know like literally a minute earlier he was on that scrape and he's walked off it. And the fact that I think if we had have hind called, and just being the chaotic nature of the fallow rut, like the younger bucks would have certainly turned and come to like, instead of looking at Uno going, oh, he's got the girls over there, they would have gone, oh, there's a girl behind us on this scrape, which we're closest to, like great. And I think because the wind was good, they would have probably come into, a few meters because they were already pretty close. But as soon as like you create that competitive edge between Uno, where he can obviously see the young bucks and he knows that's his scrape, like he's put resources and time into that. He was holding a doe there less than a minute ago. If he can then hear the visual representation of like, meow, meow, there's a doe on that scrape that I've just left, and now there's bucks between me and that doe, he's going to race over like a thoroughbred racehorse and try and round those young bucks up and see what that doe is. And the perfect example of that is literally what happened in part 2. And again, I think we kind of made that decision of, oh yeah, the chocky bucks come in, now's a good time to call. Again, if the stalk doesn't go well or doesn't play out, it's not our target buck, like we'll do it. But sometimes those little instincts you have as a bow hunter, like, and it's hard because my biggest rule is be patient and don't try and ruin the stalk. But like during the rut, there are so many natural sounds and natural things that go on. And I think even if those young bucks had have come in and Uno had a stayed put with that doe 100 meters away or 80 meters away or whatever, those young bucks would have just come into a few yards, sort of gone, oh shit, there's no doe here. What's that weird figure behind the bush? Oh, there's another one there with the camera in front of his head. Oh, there's another one just down the hill slightly with the tripod and the camera in front of his head. They would have worked out that there's something wrong. And then by the time they circled around us to try and get the wind right, they probably would have bounded off down the hill without an actual, like physically altering the hunt or scaring or educating Uno, who was by that stage, 80 meters away and hadn't come in. So I think like, especially during the rut and raw, and that's probably why it is one of my favorite times to hunt, is that you do have the avenue to play on their like excitement and their frenetic energy, like and do these calls and try a few things that you normally wouldn't. And again, like doe calls are extremely safe in my opinion to do. It's not like you're sitting there on your scrape rattling, moving 100 meters, rattling, moving 100 meters, rattling. In that instance, I definitely think it would have been a pretty good tactic to try out. But again, watch part 3, learn from that little bit of footage. And again, it might not have worked. It might have. That's the benefit of hindsight. Before we jump on to part 4, it is also worth stating that We spoke a lot about, does in estrus and factors that affect does, and you can hear all of that in our previous Fallow Rut podcast. But at the 12-minute mark, roughly, of part 3, there is a visual representation of a doe standing to be mounted. And interestingly, it's actually a doe, she's in estrus for up to 24 hours, often around 8 on average. But in this instance, it must be that the white buck and Uno were obviously preoccupied because she's getting bred by like sort of a 3 or 4 year old chocky buck, which we identified and you end up seeing in part 4. But it's that standing to be mounted, which is important because that when you start seeing that, you know that the does are being bred, and that's definitely what we characterize as peak rut. And at this stage, when does start getting mounted and the bucks know, the resources I'm putting in, the croaking, the displaying and stuff is actually equating to me now trying to breed does, like they're ready. That just really, really cements like hind calling as a tactic to use during these times. Doe calling, sorry. Mimicking the females and transmitting that sound to play on the lustfulness of the bucks. Venture Hunting and Outdoors is Australia's premier hunting retailer. Venture started from a team of passionate hunters with the mission to give Australian hunters the resource they deserve. Through community events, top quality gear, exclusive deals, and expert guidance, Venture is more than a hunting store. It's a community. Check out their incredible mega store in Brisbane today, or head to their website to shop all things hunting and outdoors.
So part 4 opens up with similarly that chocky buck, that 3 to 4 year old with a heap of potential at around the 2-minute mark. So he's actually holding like a decent harem of does, like a decent group of does. He's probably got, I'd say 10 to 12 yearlings / does in this tight valley. Like we pretty much got out of the car and straight away we're in the dark. And that's probably another benefit of when you're like starting so early. I find that you don't infringe on their croaking and stuff that much. Whereas like when you're coming up, like I've had it before where, especially with red deer, where I've been sitting on a mountain like an hour before light and all these reds are roaring. And then, the sun's just starting to come up and all of a sudden like you notice a car drive up the opposite side of the valley or something because it's not your place to hunt or whatever. And then all of a sudden like the reds just stop like calling. And you can imagine like, I say to people all the time, like I don't really like using headlights. I don't really like using headlamps and stuff when I'm walking in, especially in the morning. Cause like, imagine like a big old stag or buck, like that's 7 or 8 years old. Like for just say every year this place gets hunted for the rut and it's for 2 or 3 weeks. Like if every single morning for 5 years during the rut, they're watching someone walk up, with a headlamp on and then all of a sudden they like get bumped by a human like an hour later, like how many times do you think that needs to happen before they like associate like lights, for example, or like a car or something like that in the wee hours of the morning with humans or human sense or that type of thing. Like, and that's just, I don't know, it probably does sound a bit far-fetched and a bit of a wild theory and stuff, but I'm like, these are very intelligent animals. And I just wonder like how many times they need to have an experience and then have like another experience later to learn, to make the connection and learn. But I know personally, like I've definitely had red stags where, cars have like come up at that first light with other hunters and stuff, and all the stags have just shut up in a valley. So, definitely something I've seen firsthand. But with this buck, he was going wild. He didn't know what to do. He'd obviously been getting lucky the night before, and he'd actually crossed the valley. He'd probably come maybe 1.5 km up the valley with these does the next day, and found this group that obviously Uno and the white buck were being entertained by actual hot does. And I think he was just overwhelmed by the fact that he had all these girls. And that's often something that we find at that time of the rut, where we sort of spoke about it, and you see like the later films where they sort of go into lockdown, where like Uno, you see a little snippet of Uno in part 4, I believe, too, in an afternoon stalk, and then a lot of the white buck is mainly part 4 and part 5. But you'll notice that at that stage, they're really not occupying a lot of girls, like the dominant bucks. Like they might only have, a doe and a fawn, or 2 does or something like that. Whereas like in that, and that's where we sort of decipher the pre-rut to post, like peak rut, but before does are getting bred and after does are getting bred, like because the big bucks really just want that doe in heat, and that's where they're like happy to give up their scrapes to still mature-ish bucks, like 3, 4, 5, maybe year old, depending on like the age class of your property and stuff. But they're happy to give up the majority of their does to have the one doe that's in heat and estrus. And so, yeah, this young chocky buck didn't know what to do. He was throwing his tongue around left, right, and center. He was croaking like a madman. And yeah, it was awesome to film and watch. Like we just sat there for probably 25 minutes as it started getting light and just got a heap of good footage and stuff. But yeah, it was an awesome encounter and just showed sort of that you can leave these younger bucks and hopefully they just grow in the future.
So we left that younger buck and sort of turned to the other side of the mountain and basically we went and actually heard the white buck was croaking and we'd sort of watched him, as James was saying, he was on lockdown and we'd watched him for probably 750 odd metres traverse this ridge line, and you'll see in the footage he's probably about 30 metres behind a hot doe that's just running around, and they end up sort of in this deep dark gully probably about 100 metres below this scrape, which we'd identified was his dominant scrape in the early parts of the films, where you'll see, we were off watching from the other side of the mountain and he was just occupying does right up until 10:30 a.m. in the morning and holding fast on that territory he'd established. But what we decided to do again, because by the time we got up there was actually sort of mid-morning and he was only letting out a croak every probably half an hour or so. Like it was very intermittent and very quiet. Like they were sort of half-assed croaks. And so we sort of established ourselves on his scrape at about 15, 20 metres off his scrape by some good trees and set up there, just hoping that, if he lost interest in that doe, and in hindsight, it was probably a mistake. We probably should have crept in and it's amazing what you can sort of get away with if you just take one or two steps, sit there, assess the situation, glass. Like as James said in the Rut podcast, your binoculars aren't just like an expensive piece of jewelry around your neck. Make sure you're using them. And even if he was in really thick cover, I think because he was distracted and we'd only watch him go there with one doe, there would have been a really good opportunity to shoot him, similar to that film Mountain Monarch, where, Keith had, which was the impressive buck that Nick shot the year before, had two does and they're in this thickest, nastiest, tucked away, what we call hidden valley. And James and Nick were able to creep into sub 20 metres and shoot him because he was just preoccupied and non-lockdown. So we ended up sitting off his scrape, which was the decision we made at the time. We had a little young spiker walk through and that was about it for the morning. And then we sort of bail out and go back to camp. But part 4 and 5 especially is where I think that's, for us, reminding you that it's a 14-day trip. We've been waking up at 3:30, for a number of days now, at least a week beforehand. We're starting to get a bit fatigued. We're starting to probably doubt decisions. Nothing's necessarily worked to us as we wanted. We've had an opportunity on the target buck and didn't sort of capitalize on it. These conversations and bickering between ourselves and the egos and things are starting to come out here. So it was just an interesting time where, we're obviously tired, fatigued, we're at a caloric deficit. And then, just things happen. And in hindsight, again, it's I wonder if we were doing the right thing. But at the time we thought we were, and we're just putting in every little bit of effort that we could.
I think time stamping that stalk at 4 minutes 30 where we were sitting off the scrape and the white buck sort of in the valley, probably 250 metres below us, croaking. I just want to sort of emphasise what Ayden was saying. It is incredible. He was probably croaking we could hear him quite clearly, but he would only croak every 10 or 15 minutes. But it's incredible how he did it for probably an hour. And so that's in hindsight, obviously, what we've said multiple times now, when you're filming, it does change your thought process and stuff. And it's okay, he's croaking in a really thick gully. There's 3 of us trying to move in. He's not croaking that sort of continuously, I guess, what we'd like, where they're just frantically on a scrape. He was sort of, back and forth. And so, but if you're in that situation, it's actually not that, people love it when, there's obviously probably a doe in heat and there's probably competition and a buck's just standing there croaking nonstop for an hour. But it can be just as successful when you've got a buck that's croaking every 10 minutes. Really, you just want that positive reinforcement that he's standing in that rough area. And so that's where just moving slowly and just cutting the distance in his direction. There's so many times that, you start moving and you're 300 meters away and then all of a sudden you're 200 meters away, 10 minutes later and he croaks and you're trying to glass in the thick stuff. And then you just keep cutting the distance and all of a sudden he opens up right in front of you and you can't see him or the doe, but he's only 60 meters out. And then you just keep slowly moving in and you actually then that's exactly what happened with Keith. It's pretty funny. I was just like, while Ayden was talking, I remembered the name of the white buck. We didn't really use it much, but it was Azog the Defiler from from Lord of the Rings, or the White Orc. Because the white buck. I mean, we pretty much called him the white buck, but every so often we'd call him Azog. But he was the defiler of does. We just watched him for the first 5 days, where he had a lot of affection and time from all the does, but he was a big brutish character. I mean, like I said, it was sort of one of his nicknames, probably more than his main name, like Uno and Keith. But yeah, we obviously do enjoy naming all of our bucks that we target. It sort of just increases and adds that extra dimension to a hunt. But another thing I wanted to touch on was about 10 minutes 30, we had a really good stalk on the white buck. I actually might leave this up to Ayden because I wasn't there. So I actually went to my lovely partner, I guess brownie points here, but my beautiful, lovely partner's family for Easter at that time. So I think it was roughly like the 14th or something like that, or maybe a bit earlier, the 10th in 2022. So I went down to their place for Easter, and Ayden and Nick stayed to film. So obviously gone from 2 cameramen, like one recording the B-roll stuff and having one to record like with the big sort of clumsy tripod and sort of very heavy camera setup, to then going to one person. It made it quite difficult for Ayden, but there's a really good stalk and a lot of takeaways from the end of this part 4. So I'll let Ayden take it away.
Yeah, so as you see in part 4, especially towards the tail end of it, we just spend what seemed like, days and hours of particular stalks within, really close proximity of that white buck. And again, I think because he was quite a loud vocalizing buck, like we were able to sort of pinpoint his location, and then there was no real doubt as to, which way should we go about it. It was like we did everything right and were able to like do big laps to get the wind right and come in on him. So then by making sure that the wind was right and we had this constant, croaking, even if it was, as James said earlier, like every 15 minutes he'd let out one croak, it meant that, for an hour you could get in there and then, do it properly. Whereas if a buck croaks for 30 seconds, and then stops and then doesn't do it again, it's like makes it very hard to actually pinpoint his location over time. So Nick and I ended up creeping in on this buck, and it was, again, hard. Like, and this is where, in hindsight, like I was filming with the big camera. We had the bucket, I think it was like 70 meters, and I set up the tripod, hit record, and knew that we had about 30 minutes of recording time to hopefully try and get it done. So we then left that camera set up there on the scrape. And what's beneficial about this is that at the time, which you'll see in the footage, we ducked around, sort of skirted around the right-hand side of the hill because that's the way the wind was coming in, got the thermals right, and sort of came in level with him. And we were just using the tops of the tree. Like we couldn't see, we were peering over the edge. So the only thing that could blow our stalk at this point was sound. They couldn't see us, and potentially if the wind really swirled and sucked back over, which again was unlikely because we had this deep dark gully and a creek below us, and it was perfect time in the morning where the thermals was going down. So really, and like this is where in my head, knowing, like seeing the footage now, I know that the does ended up hearing us. And you see this cool, because at the time, Nick and I sneak into about 30 meters and we're trying to crest over the top of this lip and just see where, like, we can hear the buck letting out all these little tending groans and grunts. And we know there's does there because we'd watch them at 70 meters when we had a clear view of them and set the camera up. But it's what that camera angle actually captures is the buck is croaking the whole time and completely unaware to our presence. And this is where it goes back to respecting those does, because you'll see in the footage, at around 10 minutes 30, for example, in part 4, you'll see this doe just sort of go from, feeding and doing her natural thing, being tended by the buck, to just like sitting there pretty and like looking directly down the hill in our direction where we come from. And again, like you'll see, like there's all this transcript that Nick and I are talking and capturing as we're going up there slowly. But like through that process, we're in steep country, obviously slipping on the odd rock, boulder, a stick catches our camo and stuff. There's 2 of us closing in, like we're making slightly bit too much noise. And that doe just never sees us. Like we never even lay eyes on them. We're never even close to like laying eyes over that edge. But just that sound is enough for her to sort of move off. And you capture that in the telephoto lens. You see her run off, the buck's still croaking, and then he obviously goes, oh shit, I'm trying to breed that doe and I'll chase her off. And then what effectively happens is we set this chain of motion in where that buck just chases her up the hill, pulls her up, and they all start running again on the next little scrape. Like that's his role, is to get them on a scrape and try and breed them. And they'll sort of comply with it. And again, I think because she didn't see us or she didn't smell us, she was like, oh, okay, yeah, I might have just heard a wombat, but I didn't want to be there at that time. So they've moved and gone a couple hundred up the hill. We then follow them up, and then you see it, 13 minutes, 20 or something. So that this is all in the same morning, all in the same stalk. We start pushing the doe like up there, and then now it's actually like an hour after first light. By the time we've traversed up the hill to where they are, the thermals are starting to change, and that's a component of, whilst the wind's good right now, we know that as soon as this sun starts hitting the valley, which it was doing, like the thermals are going to go up. And it was almost like Nick and I made the decision that we would rather get spotted than winded in this point. Like I think them seeing a little bit of movement would have been better than them blatantly just smelling us. Like the last thing you ever want to do with animals is their nose is so deliberate and delicate. Like they're smelling millions of particles of human scent compared to like what we can smell, if that makes sense. So for them, it's so odorous and foul and whatnot. It's like we made the conscious decision to just be like, let's push it. If they end up starting to look, the worst thing they're going to do is kind of be like, oh, is there something there? And hopefully just poke up over the ridge. But again, keeping that in mind and trying to film it, we were probably a little bit noisy on this approach too. And long story short, we don't end up shooting the buck. But I think the takeaway message from part 4, and especially these stalks on the white buck, is like, be slow, be deliberate, because the first chance you get on these animals when you're doing a spot and stalk is going to be the best chance you get. Like, because you'll hear Nick, I can't remember if it's part 4 or part 5 or something like that, but he says something along the lines of they just seem to be going higher and higher to bed. And I think that was just like the chain effect of bumping, one doe. And then that doe is just a little bit cottoned on. Instead of bedding at the lower scrape from the field edge or the pastured edge, she then goes up. And Nick quite frankly said, that it seems like they're goats at the moment. Like they were going up to this real rocky sort of thick country. And by that stage of the trip, we'd sort of probably lost our chance to shoot the buck. Like we certainly were trying with both of them, but we just sort of played our cards. And unfortunately, those first few stalks that we had didn't quite go our way for a certain number of reasons, as we were sort of trying to be completely upfront and honest with you guys about. But this is just in hindsight, like, giving you guys really good insight into, what can go right and what can go wrong. And don't worry, like as bow hunters, there's obviously plenty that can go wrong.
Yeah, I think like I wasn't there on the actual stalk, so it's always interesting, like for me being back in the editing process and like then calling Ayden to discuss things that you like see from the footage, because obviously, like we've alluded to, like we've got like a 2.5 inch by 1.5 inch, just say screen, or you're looking through this tiny little eyepiece or whatever to like film these sequences of events, or like Ayden filmed like a 30-minute piece when their doe, like heard them coming up the hill or whatever. But yeah, it's interesting just talking about it afterwards, because there was, like at 13:20 exactly, you see the scene where, and you hear Nick say it, like he's like, the wind's really good now, but it's about to change everything, just before it. And he's 100%, like he's onto it. Like he knows that the thermal's about to switch. So it's like they obviously made that decision to be like, hey, we're going to have to push here. And same thing, like there's 2 of them in this case. It wasn't 3, but still, like it's enough that they got caught by the does. Like they were moving through a fairly open area, like, and yeah, they did push it. And maybe the wind would have held for an extra hour. Like hindsight's interesting. Like we're all looking back and trying to analyze it to then learn from it so that we can be more successful. But like Ayden said, like I think that the best time to try and shoot this white buck would have probably been the first 5 days, where he was just sitting on the scrape, on his main scrape, croaking and stuff, flat out, chasing around satellites and stuff. And that's where, if you could have got into position, maybe done a timely doe call, or maybe, sat off him at 40 or 50. And when he was chasing spikers and young bucks around, or what, he might have charged out to you, and been within bow range, or equally, he might have moved off to bed for the day or bedded up on the scrape by himself, or, so on and so forth. But as soon as we started actually stalking the white buck, that's when we started putting pressure. I don't think necessarily, like Ayden said, on him. Like he still sort of acted the same. It was more the does started changing their behaviors, and they weren't keen on using his main scrape. They were more keen on using like the scrapes that were in like really thick bush, which then just like ultimately makes it so much harder, especially as we've alluded to, 3 people trying to get through like pig tunnels and stuff to then find this like 15 by 15 open area under a tree, and that's where his scrape is in the thickest bush. Like, it just makes it so much harder. And so they obviously felt so much more secure in there because these random 3 dudes just kept, plotting up the hill and like all of a sudden just appearing at like 50 to 60 meters. But yeah, it certainly did become a lot harder. And it was just so interesting, like obviously being heard and then also just multiple times being seen. Like, and that's what we've really tried to emphasize to you guys. Like, from this 14-day series, if we learn anything, it was like, the doe's your worst enemy in these stalking situations.
Embark on an unforgettable journey with our fully guided Chital Deer hunts, catering to both rifle and bow hunters. Spotted Safaris is conducted in the heart of the Basalt Wall region, North Queensland, Australia. We specialise in catering to all experience and fitness levels of our clients, providing trophy stag chital hunts as well as beginner focus adventures and meat hunts. With over 15 years bow hunting chital deer, our guides know these animals and the grounds they hunt like the back of their hands. With chances at a mature basalt boar as a bycatch and some spectacular wildlife viewing, there really is something for everyone at Spotted Safaris. Inquire today by emailing spottedsafaris@hotmail.com or simply send them a DM on their socials. So part 5, we finally get a break because it seemed like, 3 and 4, things didn't quite go our way despite all the effort that we're putting in and the time spent on the mountain. But part 5 starts with a really cool encounter where just, again, you guys are our listeners in this instance. We'll give you the breakdown and something to look forward to. But a buck does get killed in part 5. Which buck it is, we'll let you guys find out by watching the YouTube series. But this was pretty exciting because we were playing on the fact that, there were plenty of bucks running up and down the mountains looking for those does, and we'd spotted this buck first thing in the morning. And honestly, it was probably close to 500 to 750 meters away. Like it was
I remember,
quite far. Yeah, right? I remember arguing or bickering between James, Nick and I. Like I saw this buck and I said, let's try and call him. And just because I knew the stakes of what time of the rut it was winding down towards, I think it was the 17th of April at this point.
It was pretty late. Like it was like the second last day or the third last day or something like that.
Yeah. So a lot of the does had been bred. We'd visually watched for the previous few days does being bred and things like that. And I thought, look, this buck actually had a bit of a limp. So I thought like a rattle was going to be pointless. We didn't have a scrape near us. Like he's not going to want to fight because he's probably just been bashed by another buck and whatnot. So we let out literally one really high pitched doe call and I couldn't actually see. So I cupped my mouth and I said, you guys just look through the binos because he was that far away and tell me if he like turns and responds and like looks our way. And similar to what we were saying in some of these Red Deer and Fallow podcasts is like you can often like letting out 1 or 2 doe or hind calls respectively isn't like a bad thing. And just seeing how they respond is crucial. And this buck just turned on a dime and like, again,
limping, started walking down the hill.
Yeah, 750 meters away. He didn't even like stop and look towards us. He just started moving down the hill and we were like, oh shit, all right, let's, to be honest, he started limping and running down the hill, but the pace at which he was running, we were like, shit, we've got to run. We're not in a good spot to actually to shoot this buck. So we ran like another 200 meters, wrapped around the ridge line, got to a nice shady spot where we thought like, the wind was going to be good because we, again, didn't know how long it was going to take. And then, to be honest, you watch the footage and it happens pretty quickly, which it did, but it still took about 10 to 15 minutes for this buck to come in from 500 to 750 meters away, down through a gully, across a creek. But it speaks to the power of that doe call. And honestly, between when we called initially, we maybe let out 2 or 3 different calls over a couple of minutes.
Just to encourage him to come. This is the direction that we are.
And that's right. We didn't want him to pop out 150 meters up behind us where the wind was bad or anything. So we gave him that direct line. And as they obviously do, they know exactly where you're calling from them on the mountain. And we called this particular buck into, I don't know, maybe 7 meters or something like that. And you'll see like there's multiple angles. It's just one of those perfect occurrences. And again, it happened because we were playing on it was a perfect rut bow hunt where, we had 3 of us within, 7 to 10 meters of this buck, called him in from a long way. And he had no idea what was going on, was, unnatural. He, the whole time until his last breath, would have been thinking, I'm going to get lucky with a doe that's, let me know where she is.
Just one small thing I want to touch on there. You'll notice with setup, is really important, and Nick's like obviously all over it. But so Nick's a left-handed shooter. Don't hold that against him. But he, so like when he sets up, he'll set up with his, like you're trying to cover as much as you of yourself as you can behind the tree. So in Nick's sense, he will be like his right shoulder will be up against the tree, so that only just the bow and his hand is hanging out from the left side of the tree. So he did that really successfully with his first stalk with the buck, and then also in this one, and that's just trying to conceal as much as possible. Like obviously those, whether it be a stag or a fox or anything, like they're coming to a call, they're coming into your situation. So like movement, like they're pinned in on your position. So movement in that situation is like everything. And so trying to have as much as yourself concealed as possible, but still effectively like that you can effectively get an arrow away, is critical. And so he does that perfectly, obviously, in both stalks. And yeah, same thing. Like if you're a right-sided shooter, obviously your left shoulder is going to be against the tree, so that, you know, really it's just your right, you're leading like left hand for a right shooter, and the front of the riser and stuff of the bow might be around the tree. But then most of your left shoulder and your actual chest and everything like that and your legs are like actually around the tree. And you can still pivot off the tree. So if you're right, you know, you can either, if you're right hand, you can obviously shoot straight ahead or all the way around to 90 degrees to your right, quite comfortably. But it's just setting up to maximize that, yeah, these animals aren't going to pin you, because especially if you're doing like close quarters, where often, as we've stressed, is important with these front on shots and stuff, like you really want to call them in quite close with a bow to your position, then yeah, being set up properly is like really, really important. Another thing I just wanted to discuss was so we ate both of these bucks. So the first one was shot probably around the 5th, I reckon, of April. The second one was this second buck was quite late in the rut, and both ate beautifully. Like we just did, like as you see in the film, we did steak sandwiches. We just did like steak, like little dimes, I guess, of like the backstrap. We minced some of it. We did slow cooks with some of it, as you'll see, cooked up the ribs and stuff. So like, yeah, we ate it in like pretty much every way possible. Did you think it was gamey at all?
No, you often hear bucks getting like a really bad perception of like,
I wouldn't touch that. I wouldn't even feed it to my dogs or whatever.
And the dogs turn off it and stuff. And again, like we shot these deer, literally took them straight home. It was cool, nice, autumn mornings and evenings and stuff. So we actually hung them overnight, let them air out, dry out with that cool air, and then butchered them the following days and things. And again, weren't quick to just like, shoot it, freeze it, and let all that water stay within the meat and things.
Yeah, we had three of us that were feeding at the time. So we pretty much ate like one of the bucks worth, honestly, and like that in the rut period, the 14 days between us. Because yeah, we just minced it and just we do a lot of mince wraps and stuff like that. I remember we did the slow cooks because it was easy, just chucking on in the camp oven and the camp chef and just leave it on the stove for 6 hours, get back, and you got food, like, good food for a couple of days. But yeah, I remember like a lot of the smell I feel with rutting bucks or stags or whatever is in the actual, like the hide itself. Like obviously bucks and stuff are pissing all over themselves, stags are wallowing, blah, blah, blah. But it's like once you've actually take that hide off, and the cape and the skin, like if you actually smell the meat, there's not really a smell to it. And so that's where I honestly think like being clean, and I try and avoid getting hair on meat like a Nazi. Like it's one of my pet hates when you're butchering and stuff. But yeah, I honestly try and get like no hair. And if there is hair, I'm picking it off while I'm out in the field. Like it's not one of these things that, oh yeah, you'll pick it off when you get home, because you don't, because it dries and it's just so hard. So it's just like being clean. And I find that affects and improves the eating quality of these, rutted up stags and fallow deer so much more.
And it's quite interesting to see, like as James alluded to, there's nearly 2 weeks of time difference between buck A and buck B getting shot, and you can actually see that a little bit in the fat content. The fat reserves on that first buck, he was a mature buck and obviously had been rutting and stuff like that, and he still had fat from like where he'd obviously stored all this energy over velvet in the summer period. And then you looked at buck number 2 and there was a lot less fat, more just muscle obviously, but he still ate incredibly well. Like the tenderloins and back straps and stuff were tender. And then everything else we just utilise in different cuts, whether it's stir fry, mince, slow cooked, ribs, shanks, all that type of stuff. So there's never really an excuse not to be taking meat off the mountain, especially when it's like prime venison. Like a stinky old boar is obviously a different story, but in the right circumstances, that can still be some good taco as well.
Best sausages you'll ever have. And that's the thing. Like to be honest, I don't know. The only thing I've struggled with, and it's been really hit and miss, is like rank old billy goats and stuff like that, where I've been so clean butchering them. and like made sure there was no hair and stuff. And even then you like butcher it, and then you might mince it or freeze the mince or whatever. And then you like take it out and smell it. And like, a month later, it still just smells like old billy goat. And I've then, given that to the dogs and stuff. But, with pigs, even rutting boars and stuff like that, and stags and everything like that, like, or elk or everything, like pretty much everything I've ever shot, bar a couple of billy goats, I've eaten and really enjoyed it. Like, and sometimes you might have to do slightly more to it, but overall, like, it's really good. At one last topic in part 5, so at 14 minutes 30, you see that Nick goes and checks a trial cam, and I just wanted to raise the point that, like, we obviously spoke about how important pre-rut and even in the velvet period on dams and stuff like that, but definitely pre-rut, having cameras on scrapes are for finding mature bucks and seeing what bucks are using scrapes, but it carries all the way through the rut, because especially I find it later in the rut, it becomes really important because you get to see new bucks that may be rocking up to your area, as we've discussed, but also like bucks will start moving around even within their sort of home range. So we, ended up discovering that Uno was crossing the valley and going to the other side, mainly at night and stuff, but it just opens up the possibilities to like corridors and new bucks, and just, it's like information that is very easy, like just going and checking a camera and stuff. But it just opens up more opportunities, and the more research and insight that you have into these deer behaviors, like, it's just going to help make you more successful. For the ultimate outdoor cooking experience, look no further than Camp Chef. Camp Chef is a portable cookware without any compromises to power or efficiency. Their range of cooking options include pellet grills, a cast iron range, and portable cooking systems for any environment. For better food in the bush or at home, head to their website and check them out today for yourselves. So we hope you enjoyed that breakdown of Fallow Frenzy. We just wanted to, give you as much insight and, I guess, education lessons that we learned through the filming, and obviously then the editing process, like it did for obviously the punishment that is filming. It did have a lot of benefits, even in educating like Ayden, Nick and I, in terms of, educating us on busted stalks and what we could do to improve. Like, it's very easy to reflect in hindsight on when stalks go wrong, but to actually have it like filmed out, it's like almost like having a sports game, a football game or something like that filmed out, and then being able to review it post-match. Like, it did really help us analyze and critically break down situations, and, like often what you think happened during a play or in a game or in a stalk, wasn't the case. And so it did, like, we learned a lot from this 14-day hunt around fallow characteristics and, increasing the likelihood of stalks and, just fallow behavior and stuff. So it was awesome to be able to break that down for you guys, and hopefully you took a lot away from it, because, there was certainly a lot of information and lessons that we learned. But we're going to dive into the FAQs, which, if you have one, please email us at info@twinalements.com.au, or equally you can send us a message at Twin Elements, Ayden Doumtsis Outdoors, or James Doumtsis Outdoors on Instagram. So the first listener question we have is, what's the filming strategies leading into a hunt like this? Where are the two of you behind the camera as opposed to when there's only one of you? So do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like with any of our films, the biggest thing that we're trying to do is obviously authentically, portray what bow hunting is like for us. And that's hopefully what you can sort of feel from the theme of like our hunts. And just speaking to the theme, like this hunt in particular, the sort of background of it was that we were trying to play off what had happened the previous year, where we'd had this incredible rutting encounter with the single, one antlered buck within 20 meters. Nick made the decision to pass him up, and now we had this full, a rut of 14 days to obviously try and, find him. And we didn't know if we would. We obviously had the trail camera photos, but as of morning one and that evening before, when we filmed the introduction and stuff like that, like, we were just hunting at that point. We had no idea if we were ever going to see him again, or if we were going to see him on day 3 and his antler was going to be broken again. Like, James can probably share a funny story about the following year from this hunt in 2023. But, Uno was definitely our target buck. But at the end of the day, we were just sitting out there to capture what we were, going out there to do. And that is simply just bow hunting. And as you sort of heard, like, our days were probably 16 hours long in the field. So we saw some incredible stuff. And I think the strategy leading into this was James was just going to, be Nick's shadow. And then I was going to try and obviously not impact the stalks or the hunts, but like branch out a little bit to the left. Like there are times where, for example, in that part 3, when you see Uno getting framed by the younger buck that's sort of watching him and we're sitting off the scrape there, like I don't even know if Nick and James could see any of that unfolding, whereas I had like this amazing, view, and that's what you guys, the viewers, can see. And you're probably going like, why aren't you calling? Why aren't you doing anything? And I don't think Nick and James could even see that buck, or had like, and that little buck, the 2 or 3 year old that's there in the frame, he ends up peeling around and he comes to like 6 meters from me, and I'm fully zoomed out, and like you'll see the close up of his face and stuff in this film. And again, by that stage, he's sort of out of Nick and James's realm and not even on their cards. They're looking at Uno and this little spiker, but that buck's 6 meters from me. And I've got to know as the cameraman that if I move here or even like blink the wrong way or something like that, that this buck is going to just run back up the hill straight to where he's come from and spoil the stalk. So I think going into it, it's obviously like, don't ruin the stalk if you can. Just be authentic and like, true to yourselves, hunt extremely hard, and then whatever comes from it is going to come from it. But we definitely had the luxury of trying to record, wildlife footage with the telephoto lens, and then POV, like over the shoulder sort of bow hunting style and behind the scenes with like B-roll type footage with the smaller camera and James.
I think with whenever you're filming with 2 people, it's just so much nicer to have one doing each like POV and one with the wildlife stuff. When you just got one person, you're trying to capture so much, like too much stuff. And it sounds a bit corny, but like you have to be, if you want to film hunts, like I genuinely think you have to be so good at hunting to be able to do it, because like the last thing you want to be doing is filming someone and then, you're already hindering them with extra noise, extra movement, blah, blah, blah. But then like, if you're the reason why you bust the stalk, like they're never going to forgive you for that, especially if it's like, a trophy of a lifetime. But equally, like, generally speaking, like all of our hunts, like we try and keep it authentic as possible and like film everything as it happens. Like often, like 99% of the footage you see is like, we're in a stalk, I'm filming Nick move through this gully or right up his ass, filming him and stuff as he's moving in. And then he'll generally like move in, and I've filmed him just say get from right in front of me to 5 meters away at the tree. And then I've got to like work out and be like, okay, can I actually move now without staring the buck or the doe or something like that? Or, do I have to wait? But then like when it's time for me to move, or I think I can move, then Nick obviously acknowledges that too. And then he starts moving too. And all of a sudden this like gap starts opening up. So it's like, you're almost always moving when it's like a bit sketchier, I guess, if that makes sense. Like where you're always like, oh shit, like, you're like, and I always run it through my head, even when I'm stalking with a bow in my hand, it's like doe, buck, 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 like you're counting off names and heads in your head when you're stalking and stuff, just to like check off and be like, yep, that doe's fine, that buck's fine, that's doe's, oh no, that doe just turned towards you and stuff. Okay, watch her, keep sliding your feet. Like we use the old slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Like I tell myself so much when I'm filming and hunting, like, and stalking in, that's like the slogan that I live by, I guess. Like, I don't know about you, but it reigns true on so many of these ones where it's like you can accomplish so much quite quickly, to be honest, like just by just shuffling your feet. And that's even when, some of these stories and stuff that we spoke about during this hunt series, Fallow Frenzy, that, like you're like, oh, there's a croaking buck. He's not croaking very much, but it's like crazy to think what you can accomplish even in really thick bush by just like cutting the distance and just like edging and like picking your way forward slowly and just making that, like, that 5 meters becomes 10 and 20 and 100. And all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, I'm 30 meters off a croaking buck. It did take me an hour, but you're there now, and then you're in the zone.
I think the amount of non-verbal communication that goes on, especially in those last, like when you're sub 30 or 40 or 50 meters closing in on like this buck or the target animal or whatever, is like intense. And it's obviously, we've actually, because Nick, James and I are so similar in, like how, like what we want to obviously achieve, and then the process of hunting and filming it and stuff. We'll often, like, just from Nick's body language, we can't see what he's seeing because we're like a meter behind him, or we're trying to keep a low profile and the camera's slightly above our head or something. But we're just feeding off the way he moves and like trusting that, if he's taking a step or two here, it means that we can take a step behind him. And it's not necessarily 2 steps, but we definitely can do that 1. And then if he even starts to slow, that's an indication for us to stop, because do you know what I mean? Like his reaction time is he's seeing it in real time, 25% later, we're seeing it. So then by the time you're the third cameraman or the third person on the mountain, the second cameraman, like you're getting real-time information so far behind when it's actually occurring, and you're just trusting the movements of the people ahead of you and the movements and even the way they snake through the bush. It's like, you know, if Nick takes one step to the left, by the time the second person takes a step to the left and then the third person takes a step to the left, you can have people like spread out over 1.5 meters, 2 meters, looking as a massive object. Do you know what I mean? For an animal that you're 30 meters from. So we've actually got to the point where in our films, like, you know, Nick, and this is where Nick's like exceptional at it. He's one of the best in the business in terms of being able to talk to a camera. But like, there's so many times in a stalk where like, because we are so good at the non-verbal communication and like we all understand exactly what's going on, we've had to say to Nick when we're 100 meters from a buck, like, we know what's going on. We know you know what's going on, but can you explain it to the camera in this, you know, piece to the camera? And again, it's trying to be authentic, but just let the viewers know like what we're doing, what we've just done, like what you're anticipating is going to happen. And he does that so eloquently and like perfectly a lot of the time, where it's, you know, he turns around, gives us a 20-second piece that we can now play over the next B-roll footage of the stalk for the next, you know, couple of minutes or hour or whatever it is. But it's just, you know, we do that and the stalk's not necessarily interrupted. It's not like we're sitting there off a croaking buck at 30 meters being like, no, do that again, do that again, do that again. It's just, he's a professional. We're obviously getting to the point where we're good enough with our videoing and photography. And I think it all stems on the back of like our hunting abilities and stalking abilities personally, where even when we're trudging around with like mics and camera gear and gimbals and tripods and everything, like it's still a very authentic hunting experience to what like most people would go, holy shit, I can't even get like that close with a bow by myself, let alone, you know, again, testament to like to that Mountain Monarch film where we had 3 of us and that buck at 20 meters for 15 minutes and he had no idea we were there until eventually, you know, one of the does ended up catching us. And like, I do encourage people to obviously go back to that film because it's going to give you an insight into what's coming up with the rest of Fallow Frenzy, like as you're hearing it. You know, part 2 is coming out in a couple of days. So we're really excited for you guys to sort of be hearing this now and then obviously seeing things in the future.
Instead of doing another listener question, we just want to share some funny stories and a bit of behind the scenes of this hunt rather than answering another question. So as you can already tell, Nick, Ayden and I are all very passionate Hobbit and Lord of the Rings supporters, I guess. And so, yeah, it's often we actually call each other after Bilbo, Bilby. So it's just like a transition that's happened, which it's, I don't know, quite weird, but it's just the inside scoop. We're all the same. Like it's not, yeah, but it would be funny. Like we'll be walking around on the mountain and, you know, we'll be bush bashing out or whatever. And someone's like gently playing a Lord of the Rings track on their phone or driving out everywhere, whether it be New Zealand or South America or whatever. Like, we've pretty much it's called Tarmageddon, which is like the original Spotify playlist, which is just like all the Lord of the Rings. And for some reason, Black Betty, I don't know how that snuck in there. But yeah, that is the playlist that we go to every time. And the Golden Horn gets played quite a lot. So yeah, it's awesome.
For those of you that are curious, I've been referred to as Legolas by the boys and self-proclaimed as well, but I'll let you figure out who's Aragorn and who's Gimli out of the remaining 2. One boy is going to be disappointed, but everyone knows I've got the best eyes in the business and that's why I've been called Legolas. But a funny behind the scenes from this, not particularly this hunt, but many of you would have seen our hunt from years and years ago, Relentless, was where I followed Nick around for, again, it was like a multi-day trip, potentially passing on in that week-long sort of duration. And the weather was just absolutely atrocious. It was, to be honest, it was quite dog shit. We had the mistiest mornings and days and just rainfall, and to the point where like there were days where we'd hunt but we couldn't really film, and then we finally ended up getting it done on this boar. But I remember the days leading into this, as a bit of like a morale booster in camp, Nick turned to me one night when we were sitting by the fire, like just trying to get as much food into our guts as possible. Like we were sitting there, I think we were eating like lamb 4-quarter chops and Alfredo pasta, which is a bit of that
was the go-to.
Yeah, on day like 15, you know what you're having for dinner, and it's just to try and get the morale back in camp. And we were sitting there by the fire and Nick just started, like, as we do every evening, like pack our bags with like water and pack our bags with food and this and this. And I was watching Nick and he's just he just started like putting random things into his backpack, like, and the 3 or 4 things that I remember him putting in there was just like a Two Blade Productions, shout out to Brad Smith, like bow hunting deer addiction DVD or something, like in his backpack. And then he got like a copy of Bacon Busters, the old hunting magazine, just off the table, and puts that in there. And then we had this running joke because we had up at the cabin, there's this TV that we'd obviously you know, if it was late at night and we got back to camp early, or the weather was absolutely shit and we weren't hunting or something, we'd watch like, you know, the one DVD that we had. And I just remember, shout out to I think it's called Priest. It's this film. It's like medieval, or I can't remember, but there's like vampires and priests and shit, and they're at war. And the thing that just tipped me off over the edge, like it was all outrageous, throwing all this extra shit and extra weight in his backpack. I think he threw like a massive 10-inch Bowie knife in there as well in case a boar charged him, like just completely taking the piss. And then what threw me over the edge was like he threw a candle in there or something, and then this Priest DVD, and said like, I can't remember what the line was, but it was something along the lines of, when the darkness comes, we will be ready, or something like that. And I just remember like we ended up shooting this boar the next day and just taking the absolute mickey out of each other and laughing. But obviously like you guys don't ever see that, but it's just, you know, we were obviously like pretty tired, pretty flat. And then it's just, being able to make light of it and remind yourselves why you're out there, you know, that we're choosing to do this, we're choosing to bow hunt, we're choosing to do something that's hard, and then finally get the results after multiple days. And that's just the characteristic that comes through in all these adventures that we've had with Nick and with James and myself. Like, you know, Mountain Monarch was, I don't know how many days James and I were there for.
We had like just grinded it out for about 10 days or so on red deer. Like we were hunting this one, which we probably should break down at some stage too, but this one really incredible stag that we called Graham. He was a piece of shit. I'm not going to lie. I didn't like Graham at all. Nick, he had this huge, like he probably had a 5,000 acre like valley system, but because there was so few hinds there, like I think he roared, I don't know, maybe like 3 times collectively. And like the whole time we were hunting him, we just had this like super low density population of deer, but he was an incredible, like I think he was a 5x7, but he was almost like palmated, like in the sense that he had these like webs coming off his tines and stuff, because he was just so old and so heavy. And we just had like such a grueling trip with him. But the same thing, like it was the whole time it's fun because you're working towards a common goal, and like no one's like, we obviously get snappy and stuff at each other, and like you look back and like everyone wants to be successful. So it's like every hunt, like it's going well when it's going well, and it's, you know, you get down a little bit, but you know, we'll bicker and stuff, then you get right back up. But maybe just as a signing off for behind the scenes stuff, do you want to, so the long story short of it, I think when Ayden, we had like Kimmy and Adam Greentree and Nick come up and hunt chital with us, and Ayden and Nick mainly hunted together, and I think like we'd had a lot of rain just before, and it was in like July, and so the deer weren't really rutting and they'd like spread out and stuff, so it was pretty hard hunting, and we were all struggling to like find stags. And I just remember that Ayden and Nick like found this one really good stag or something like that and lost him or something, and then you gave a lizard some. Oh yeah, like, Ayden was looking at me like so puzzled, like what is this bloke talking about?
Yeah, I was like, where are you leading to? Because I remember at the start of that hunt, Nick had come up and he'd never hunted chital, and I obviously had like a background in knowing what chital deer do and just their tendencies and things. And I remember saying to him like, I know you're a good bow hunter, but like, let's both drop the shit, drop the egos. Like, you're up in my neck of the woods. I've listened to you hundreds of times. Like, if you trust me, like I'll get you a stag at the end of this trip. And like, to be honest, it was way harder hunt than like I could have even envisaged or imagined. And we got to like the last day of the trip, essentially. It's like a 4 or 5 day hunt. And we'd seen this stag at first light in the morning, and we just couldn't get near him because there was like, you know, 30 hinds between us and him. And this is where I can finally say hinds, because we're talking about chital deer, which I love to talk about, obviously. And this stag ended up going like, I think 30 inches or very close to it, but had like amazing brow tines, amazing inners, like just one of the nicest, most representative chital deer you'll ever see. And we saw him first thing in the morning, and the urge was to, like, as Nick often loves to do, is like charge at him like a mountain boar. And I just said, mate, there's too many roos and too many deer in front of him here. Like, we're going to actually have to go around and get the wind right. And like, we did that and then sort of lost him in the process. Like, as chital deer do, they move. And I said to Nick, like, trust in the process. Like, we know he hasn't gone back past us. So in this little funnel that we're hunting was between 2 creeks. I said there's a fair chance he's actually crossed one of the creeks and gone back to this real prominent bedding area on the basalt. And honestly, it was getting to the later end of the day. Like, we'd missed lunch, but then decided to, it's like now 4:00 in the afternoon. Like, let's actually sit down and have a bite to eat, because we're getting delirious in the heat and things like that. And we pulled out like muesli bars and all this shit. And we're just sitting there, and this little dragon of some species, like a little lizard or reptile species, climbs up on a rock right next to us. And Nick's like flicking at some, muesli bar, being like, come on, mate, have a bit of that, like trying to, feed him. And then he said, nah, bugger it. And he went over and like spent about a minute trying to catch a grasshopper, catches this grasshopper, and then flicks this little grasshopper to the lizard, which proceeds to then grab it and eat it. And Nick's like, that's it. We've fed the gods. We've appeased the gods or something like that. And I just remember thinking like the way luck has it, and like the bullshit, I thought back to that priest and chucking things in the backpack. Like, sometimes just, it was probably already set into motion because we'd done all the right things like earlier in that morning and not spooked the hinds and not spooked the stag, and we were hunting the right areas and doing the right things. And to be honest, like, I don't think if we fed the lizard or not, it was going to impact it. But it's just so funny that little morale booster was enough to give us some energy and be like, all right, let's dial in. We've got a couple hours before dark. Like, let's finish off hunting this bedding area. Like, we've got a couple hundred meters, and we literally walked maybe another 200, 300 meters. And I spotted the stag's antlers in the grass. And to be honest, the rest is history. Like, we ended up sneaking into within bow range, and I essentially got into like 30 or 40 meters. I can't remember now. And again, Nick had just followed me right in there. I essentially was like, come on, mate, like, this is your stag, like, jump in front. And he took a few steps, got in front. And then as the stag stood up, he ended up shooting him, and the rest is history. Like, he's got this beautiful, magnificent shittle stag on the wall at home, and we've got a lifetime of memories and again, like, funny stories that, like, we take our bow hunting and stuff so seriously, but you look back on it and it's not necessarily the animals or the highest of highs. It's just like the little funny moments and just the adventure that we have on all these hunts, much the same that you sort of look back on most fondly.
So just wrapping up this episode, we hope you guys enjoyed a few of the little stories that we've shared along the way, little insights into the behind the scenes of some of our hunts, but also just a few lessons, hard-earned lessons that we've learned along the way chasing fallow deer and even red deer. So we hope you guys take a lot away from this, and that it puts you in the right situation or gets you the opportunity that you guys are looking for, that you can capitalize on and get that trophy of a lifetime, or even just the meat in the freezer. So hopefully you enjoyed the podcast, but just a few things to add into the calendar once again. So you would have seen hopefully the first part of Fallow Frenzy, as we've sort of discussed and broken down. It is a 5-part series, so make sure to check out the YouTube channel every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Please make sure that you subscribe to the channel. So we are going to be doing a giveaway shortly for 20,000 YouTube subscribers. So make sure that you're subscribed to that. We are going to be giving away a pair of Lower Ranger GTX 3 boots, which Ayden and I absolutely adore and love. And we are just in the midst of talking to a couple of our ambassadors at the moment to bulk up that prize pack. So stay tuned for that. But please support us, and please support the people that support us. So make sure you're following our ambassador links, but also subscribed and following us across all our social platforms.
On March 1st, 2025, we're going to be at the Flow State Outdoors Expo. This event is perfectly catered for hunters, fishermen, and all those outdoor enthusiasts alike. This event is taking place at Wodonga Racecourse and Exhibition Centre in Victoria on the New South Wales border there. So please come down, support a great cause, meet like-minded people, come say g'day to James and I, who are going to be at a Twin Elements Cross Spotted Safaris booth. And check out all the other vendors that are making the effort to support the day. If you want to get in on the action, there are some early bird tickets available now, leading right up to the moments just prior to the event. So for just over $20, you can buy your tickets to get you in the door and in the draw for tons of great and amazing prizes. I think 99% of these prizes, whether it's knives, camouflage gear, like adventuring packs, meat packs, all these types of things are going to be drawn and given out on the day. So you must be in attendance. But as James and I have alluded to in previous podcasts and on our socials, we are giving away a Spotted Safaris fully guided Chital Deer hunt in 2026 as part of this early door prize giveaway. So you must purchase an early bird ticket to go in the running. We're essentially treating it as a bit of a raffle. We've spoken to Wade and the good folks over at Flow State Outdoors. So instead of having to be there on the day, they've stretched out those entries to be for our friends like over in Western Australia or the Northern Territory or anything like that. If you do want to buy an early bird ticket, support the cause, but you won't be able to come and be in attendance of the day, you can go in the entry to win this Spotted Safaris hunt, which is going to be absolutely epic. We cater to all fitness levels, all hunting experiences and styles and all that type of stuff. So it should be the best opportunity you're going to get to win a guided Chital Deer hunt. Yeti are also hosting an epic VIP wild dining experience from 5 to 7 p.m. on the same evening of March 1st. To be part of this experience and indulge in some epic food cooked by some incredible chefs, make sure that you grab a ticket. It's about $110, which you can find on the Flow State Outdoors website. And be quick. There were only 100 tickets available, and I imagine by the time you're hearing this, there's not going to be too many left. So if you're interested, check that out rather quickly.
Once again, thank you everyone for supporting the podcast. We appreciate all your feedback and love that you guys are sending towards Ayden. We do reply to and appreciate every single message or email that we get, whether it be on our socials or whether it be through the email. So if you have an FAQ or a podcast topic that you'd like to or us to discuss or answer, please send that to info@twinelements.com.au or equally reach out to us on socials, whether it be the Twin Elements account, Spotted Safaris account, or James Doumtsis Outdoors or Ayden Doumtsis Outdoors. Like I said, we will reply to all your messages. Sometimes it is a bit of a delay if we're out working or out hunting and we don't have service, but we will get back to you all, and we really do appreciate all the feedback. Like if there's something you want us to, change about the structure, like if you guys like it when we share these sort of stories, like more intimate stories and behind the scenes stories, or whether you learn better from hunting stories and want a little bit less of that like pure just educational tips and tactics, we want to hear it, because at the end of the day, like we are doing this podcast for you guys, and so we want to hear however you whatever template or format you like that in, and whatever you guys want to be hearing from us, we want to know. So please send us a message. And once again, thank you for all the support. We really do appreciate it. We do read and reply to all the comments where people actually leave it on a podcast on Spotify and whatnot. If you guys can please make sure you're following along to keep up to date, and share anything that you see on socials. We really do appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Rightio, guys. Thanks very much, and best of luck to all of you going out and hopefully recreating your own Fallow Frenzy, this fallow deer rut, which is coming up rather quickly. So all the best, guys. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.